The action of this story begins in the estate of the Earl family Blaze, who for many years faithfully and truthfully served the Empire, led the Fourth Knightly Order, and now their family nest was on fire, and the servants fled wherever, trying to save themselves. Irina stood with tears in her eyes in the room. A man came to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and asked the girl to go to Arden and hide there, and he would do his best to hold off the enemies. The strangers broke into the house. The man bared his sword and was about to engage in battle and asked the beautiful woman to leave the house, for she had to survive at any cost. She had no right to waste any more time and ran. The girl didn't understand how or why all this had happened. Irene ran forward, ignoring the sounds of battle behind her. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice and slowed down. She wasn't dreaming. It was little Mirabelle hiding in the corner and crying, not knowing what to do or how to do it. 20 years have passed since that terrible night, and the protagonist has become the strongest and most prominent knight on the continent. Though the girl had no strength in the moment, but it was for the sake of this day that she had gone through a hell that was hard to call life. The beauty's eyes blazed with anger and determination to kill the man who approached her. It was none other than King Paveluk, who, although he was a man of years, he was still in great physical shape and was quite chipper after the bloody battle. The girl knew very well that it was this man's greed and his desire to strengthen his position in the Empire that had caused the fall of her family. All these years, Irina had lived for revenge, and now she was one step away from it. But the man smirked. He believed the advantage was on his side, and he would easily kill the last of the Blaze family. But Irina was not going to give in to him and rushed into the attack with the clear intention of sending her opponent to the other world. While King Paveluk easily blocked her blows and was sure that the girl could not defeat him, not now, nor in a year, nor in the next life. Unfortunately, he was right. And the blow he gave the girl was fatal. She fell to the ground, her soul filled with regret, because she never had time to avenge the death of her family. Only the universe had other plans for her, and Irene didn't die, but woke up as if nothing had happened in her room. And not just in a room, but in her old room in the family estate, which was destroyed 20 years ago. The protagonist went to the mirror and began to closely study her reflection. She was surprised that she looked so young and innocent. For many years, she had dreamed of returning to the past, but it was like a figment of a sick imagination, because such miracles do not happen. Next was more interesting and unbelievable. There was a knock on the door, and as soon as the girl opened them, she saw her little sister on the threshold of her bedroom, who was smiling happily at her. Irina was frightened and did not understand what was happening, because Mirabelle's hands were warm and her voice sounded real. The girl said that the crown prince would attend the ball that their family was organizing. The main character cried and hugged her sister, because all 20 years she was tormented by guilt that on the day of the attack, she left her little sister in the house and ran away to escape from the knights. She was happy now, except that the strange thing was that she could feel the warmth of the girl's body even through the dream, which made it too realistic. Suddenly, Irina pulled away from her sister and asked what year it was, and the girl gave her the answer to that question. The girl realized that she was indeed in the past, even a year before the fall of their house, and Mirabelle lowered her gaze. She was ashamed of herself for barging in on her sister like that. After all, she was working hard and probably didn't have time for such nonsense. What was also interesting about all of this was that their ball was going to be attended by the Crown Prince of Carmel Van Dimitri Rupord, who had never appeared anywhere before. No one knew what he looked like, and generally died soon after on the battlefield. It was the death of the heir to the throne that unleashed Paveluk, who rebelled and became king, destroying the Blaze family in the process. Knowing all this, Irina came to the logical conclusion that if His Highness remained alive, her family would also survive, as together they would be able to fight back against the traitor. At that moment, Irene had the thought that perhaps if she saved the crown prince, her family would be fine, and so the chance she had been given should not be missed. If the girl's memory was correct, the young man was killed on the outskirts of the capital around this time, which shook the entire city. She changed her clothes and went outside, thinking that she needed to get a weapon and get into action. Plus, Glenn was getting engaged, and she could tell her parents that she was going to help with the preparations. She was distracted from thinking through the steps of the plan by her brother, who was doing fencing practice in the courtyard. The young man was definitely tired, but nevertheless smiled affectionately at his sister, and asked her how long she was going to just stand there and stare at him. The girl did not answer immediately, so the young man thought that something was wrong. But she assured him that everything was fine and said that she wanted to go and help Glenn in preparing for the engagement. The brother did not feel the trick, so he gave the go-ahead while asking his sister to be careful. Irina was glad as the first part of her plan was successful. Now she found a sword in the armory. The plus side was that she had partially retained her skills from her past life. Plus, among many things in the armory, she found armor that belonged to her mother. The protagonist clearly understood that for the sake of saving her relatives, she would do anything, and therefore the first thing to help the prince to avoid death. Everything would have been fine, but at some point something had gone wrong, and now, as she went to bed, she was thinking about it hard and doomed. Suddenly, the carriage stopped, and one of the knights rode up to Irina. He reported that Derek thought his sister was accompanied by a small number of guards and had sent them to help. Now the question was how to proceed. It was easy to come here, but it was almost impossible to get out of the house past the guards. But she had to get out now if she wanted to save His Highness's life. So there was no time left for doubts, and she turned to a maid named Sophie and asked her to fulfill one of her requests. So Irina made up a story about a young man living near their house that she likes very much, and now that she's here, she can't stop thinking about him. Then she handed the girl a coin and said that she would go to visit him for a while and asked the maid not to tell anyone about it. Sophie pressed the coin to herself and asked her mistress to return as soon as possible. After that, she went and immediately changed into her mother's armor, realizing that she couldn't waste a moment. When Irina arrived at the clearing, she saw dozens of corpses from the prince's guard lying on the ground. Nevertheless, the girl hoped that Carmel was alive, and she was right. The young man was wounded, and at a disadvantage, being attacked from behind by one of his opponents. Irina froze on the spot. She expected to see a lot of things, but not like this. Her eyes caught on the guy's hand. Anyone in her place would have done the same, because Carmel's hand was at this moment not human, but dragon's, with scales and other charms. At that moment, the protagonist remembered a legend she had been told as a child, that long ago the Rupord Empire had been ruled by a creature that was neither dragon nor man. Come to think of it, it didn't matter to her who the guy really was, because she needed his patronage, and he was beginning to notice another actor in the clearing. Irina gathered her thoughts and decided to join the game. Then she created and threw a bomb in the direction of the attackers. The bomb exploded, and because of the thick smoke, the guys couldn't see or understand anything. Meanwhile, Irina saddled her horse and rode up to the prince, extending her hand to him and asking him to trust her this time. Carmel looked at her in disbelief and didn't know if he was a friend or an enemy, though something seemed vaguely familiar to him, whatever it was. But the young man decided to believe the stranger, except that he decided to lead the horse himself. But no one was going to let them go easily, so the enemies used arrows and one of them hit the prince's shoulder. He was in a lot of pain, but Carmel was sure that he would be able to hold on a little longer. The main thing was not to stop. Noticing the girl's eyes on him, he asked not to look at him as a dead man, because he was still alive, although not quite healthy. It was nice, so Irina asked him to hold on a little longer so as not to make the people waiting for him worry. After these words, the protagonist started shooting at the enemies with a hand crossbow to buy them some more time if possible. Her attack worked, and they were able to break away from the chase and stopped to catch their breath, because as it was, but the chase was intense. Irina approached him and asked to see his wound. His Highness nodded in agreement. Irina thought about which side to approach him from. It was good that his arm was back to normal. The young man noticed her hesitation and assumed she was thinking about the oddities of his anatomy. He was right, but the girl tried to save face and looking at all his scars realized that the rumors of his exploits were true. It was only now that Carmel realized that he hadn't seen this knight among his men, so he had a logical question as to why this man had saved him. Good question. Irina knew it was best to tell the truth in the beginning, so she blurted out that she wanted to marry the prince. Carmel could think of hundreds of answers, but this one shocked him a little, because in fact everything was going well for his future. But the girl did not understand his confusion and repeated her request for marriage, because she thought that he did not hear her or misunderstood her. His Highness was silent for a long time, not knowing what to say to all this. But then he said resolutely that he was not interested in men. Such an answer puzzled the protagonist, because she thought that he understood that he was not a guy, but a girl proposing to him. Carmel believed that the knight was speaking strangely because of a prophecy, the gist of which was that the prince's first wife would spend her entire life completely alone. The saddest part of this prediction is that she will suffer a sad fate and a terrible death at the end of her life's journey. But Irina didn't care much about that, as the most important thing for her was to save her relatives, and for their sake she was ready to make such a sacrifice. To convince Carmel to marry her, she took off her helmet and her golden long hair cascaded down to her shoulders. After a short pause, the girl introduced herself, but the prince already knew perfectly well who she was since he addressed her by name. Carmel, on the other hand, was curious to know how she knew he was in danger, as well as where such a noble lady had learned how to wield a weapon so ungracefully. At that moment, the girl realized that she had miscalculated a bit, as she had not thought out in advance what to answer to such questions. Nevertheless, she made up a story that she was secretly engaged in swordsmanship, and that she had come to the clearing by chance when she was looking for a secluded place for training. The prince sighed and said that this time he would take her at her word. Such a quick decision by His Highness made the protagonist think that they had met before. Irina wasn't wrong in her guesses, but since she couldn't remember anything, the prince asked her to disregard his words. The whole situation was strange for both of them. The girl, on the other hand, picked herself up and said that her family had supported his family for many years, and she would like to breed with him and do her best to make sure he became the next king. Carmel would never have thought Irina capable of such recklessness, but then he nodded and said he was quite willing to be her husband. But it was important for the young man to know that the girl would not change her mind and would not retract her words, because she was not going to have a rosy future because of the prophecy. His Highness was giving her one last chance to think things over and escape, for he might not be entirely human. Yes, she couldn't tell him what was going on in her heart, but she wasn't going to give up, because when he became emperor, she would try to be more than just a pretty doll to him. Carmel realized that Irina was confident in what she was offering, so the guy smiled and told her to always remember that she was the first one to approach him with the offer. If anyone thought it was an awkward situation, they were mistaken, for it became so when men from his squad came to the prince's aid. But, lest anyone should guess her identity before time, Carmel asked the girl to leave, for he would find her himself in 10 days. It was a reasonable decision, so Irina put on her helmet and asked His Highness to be careful and take care of his life. She also asked the young man to be extremely careful with Duke Palak, who ruled the Lunan lands. After that, Irina galloped home, thinking that nothing bad should happen to the prince. Carmel did not expect that he needed to watch out for his uncle, for he knew that the danger he faced was from another man. At that moment, the noble lady received a secret message saying that this time too, the attempt on the prince had failed. It did not escape the eyes of the maid that her mistress was very much annoyed at the message she had received, though she denied it and ordered the maid to leave her chambers at once. In fact, she tried more than one way to kill Carmel, but he did not want to die, so the woman burned the note, while giving herself a promise to do everything to make His Highness regret that he was alive. A new day came. Irina set off again. She realized that she had much to discuss with the prince. There was little left to wait, and while he went about his business, she would actively pursue her own matters. After arriving home, the girl began active physical training, which included running and other exercises, because she had to become stronger. It was a little unpleasant to recognize the fact that at the moment, she was too weak to resist her enemies. Derek didn't understand what had gotten into his sister. After all, she had never taken the time to exercise before. She had even missed Glenn's wedding, so she would be better off going to lie down. The girl admitted that she wasn't going to slack off on her workouts anymore. After all, the stronger she was, the less sore she would be. Derek hadn't expected such eagerness from his sister. Nevertheless, he understood the logic behind her words, and the girl admitted that she was done with training for the day. After a productive workout, Irina changed her clothes and began to study the documents, because during her absence she had accumulated quite a lot of different things to do. In a stack of papers, she found one very busy letter. It was from the Marquess of Holland, the woman who had control of all social life in the south of the empire. And this influential person out of the blue called the main character to visit her tea party. It was a little strange, because Irina could not remember whether she had received such invitations before or not. Since the girl was the daughter of the Count, she decided to attend the Marquise's tea party. But as soon as she started to choose an outfit, it became obvious that she had nothing to wear. At that moment, Mirabelle came into her room and asked what her sister was doing. Irina explained the situation with a smile. The younger sister was glad that Irina was invited to the tea party. But then she was worried because she realized that it would be extremely difficult for her sister to find a suitable dress in such a short time. At that moment, Mirabelle remembered that she had a suitable outfit for the tea party. It was only necessary to modify it a little to fit her sister's figure and height. Though Irina tried to refuse, but the girl insisted on her own. She did not want her sister to be offended because of the dress. But the girl also did it for a reason. She asked to take her with her to the tea party. The protagonist understood that this is a little dangerous, because the sister has always been a weak child, often sick, and although she made her debut in high society, she no longer appeared in it. In good faith, Irene did not want to take her sister to the reception and offered to take her elsewhere. But the girl was stubborn and insisted on her own, and then reminded her sister that the Marquis Shelby's daughter would be at the tea party. And here Irina tensed a little. She remembered perfectly well that Elena Shelby was the only daughter of the Marquis and the first beauty of the Empire, only to remember what would happen to the girl in the future the main heroine could not. Mirabelle noticed her older sister's confusion and said that if she didn't remember anything, she still couldn't forgive the Marquis's daughter for the offense she had caused. After that, the girl decided to quickly get busy with the outfit, and the protagonist had to persuade Daddy to let her little sister go with her to the reception. Alfred Blaze had indeed come home. This was the meeting Irina had been looking forward to, probably more than anything else in the world, for her last memory of her daddy was his execution. Father and daughter stood opposite each other, greeting each other politely. The man then approached his youngest daughter, stroked her head, and asked how her health was. The girl pleased him by saying that she had not been ill during his absence. Then the whole family sat down at the table, though Mirabelle didn't quite understand why there were so many dishes in front of them today, and her older sister's behavior seemed a little strange to her. Irina ate nothing and only stared at her father, whom she hadn't seen in ages. Nevertheless, the first thing Alfred asked his son if he would take part in the fencing competition, and when he received an affirmative answer, he asked his son to give his best and show everything he was capable of. But if things worked out for his son, it meant that the lad would have to help him with some business in the capital. Then all business here would have to be managed by Irina. In her previous life, this news would have pleased her. For all the domestic chores, caring for the men in the house and taking care of her younger sister, she considered it her destiny. But now she was even a little offended. After the meal, Irina decided to talk to her father face to face. The girl informed her parent that she planned to take her to a tea party with the Marquis Holland Mirabelle, who herself wanted to go with her. Besides, the little sister was also the daughter of the Count, who needed to take part in social life. Irina argued that at least once it was worth making concessions to her sister, because if she forbade everything, the girl would get even sicker. Alfred thought for a moment and agreed, but all responsibility for Mirabelle's condition now fell on the eldest daughter's shoulders. Now that they had dealt with that, it was time to talk about another important matter. The Earl informed the protagonist that she had received a marriage proposal from the Morris family. On the one hand, it was expected. On the other hand, it was very out of place. So the girl said that she trusted her father's opinion, but she wanted her marriage to be as beneficial to their family as possible. She wanted her fiancé to either have high status and wealth or be as good at swordsmanship as Derek, for Irina realized that her plan to marry the prince might fail. So she needed to convey her wishes to her father and come up with a backup plan. Soon they finished talking. The girl was about to leave when the Count asked her to take care of her sister at the tea party, because she was much more tender and weaker than the protagonist. Irina agreed and left the office. She sighed heavily as she realized that it was foolish to expect anything different from her father. Suddenly, she saw a cup of cocoa, which was prepared for her by her older brother. She could not hide her smile, because in her childhood, he always made this drink for her when she was very sad. Nostalgia was fine, but there was Mirabelle hiding under the bed, and Irina had sternly told her sister that she couldn't even go into her room without permission, even if her little sister wanted to sleep next to her once. Mirabelle, on the other hand, was worried about her father scolding or otherwise ruining her sister's mood, since she was the only one he was so strict with. It was too cute, so the girls fell asleep together. But after returning to the past, Irina started having nightmares. It was a new day, and Mirabelle could not wait to show her sister her masterpiece, as the girl had prepared a beautiful and sophisticated dress for the tea party at the Marquise, and Irina did not expect that her sister is so talented. The girl admitted that she only came up with the design, and with sewing she was helped by the maids. The protagonist was a little sad that her sister's father probably wouldn't allow her sister to develop her talent, but she wanted the girl to do whatever she wanted, because it was enough that she would never be free again. It was now time to go to the reception. Quite a number of guests had already assembled at the house of the Marquise Holland, who were welcomed in the courtyard by the hostess of the evening in person. The first to arrive at the event was the Marquise's daughter, Shelby. Everyone was wondering where she got such a beautiful dress. Those whispers behind her back made the girl smile happily. The girl crouched in a deep curtsy, greeting Lady Marissa and thanking her for the invitation. The woman was delighted to have Lady Shelby as her guest, thinking that she was dazzling today. It was true that the crowd's attention was even more attracted to the Blaze sisters, for no one had seen them here before, so they didn't know who these beautiful girls were. Lady Holland was glad to see the girls at her tea party. She had been afraid they would not come on account of their ill health. The preparations for the tea party were complete, and Marissa hoped that the young guest would have a good time here. The sisters sat down next to each other at the table. Mirabelle liked the cookies and wanted to ask their cook to bake a similar one, but for now she could nibble on as many sweet things as she wanted. Meanwhile, Lady Shelby and her friends decided to teach Irina a lesson since she showed up at the event in such a beautiful dress. After that, they came up with a plan and approached the sisters' table, saying that they hadn't seen each other in a while, so they were glad to see each other again. Whereupon one of the girls yanked the tablecloth and the teacups and food all tumbled over and began to fall. The sisters bounced away frightened. The brown-haired girl, on the other hand, took on an innocent look and said she was sorry because she was so clumsy. It is clear that the main character did not believe in this fairy tale, however, did not want to fight with them, and said that she and her sister were not hit, so everything is fine. Lady Shelby ordered the maid to pour tea for the Blaze sisters, since their cups were empty on her account. The maid began to pour the drink, and Irina realized that something was obviously wrong, for she had a strong impression that something like this had happened before. Then Lady Shelby and her friends also put something in her tea, and she naively drank it, for she could not spit it out because of etiquette. So as soon as she noticed her sister about to take a sip, she knocked the cup out of her hands. This act caught Lady Marissa's attention. Lady Shelby had not expected such a development either, for she did not need the extra attention. But she was not going to admit her guilt and decided to blame it all on Irina, as if we had accidentally spilled her tea, and offered to have a cup with her, and she made a mess of it, and cried bitterly to convince herself. Except Irina wasn't going to be quiet either. Yes, she didn't cry, but she clearly and confidently said that Lady Shelby was lying, after which she added that the tea with which the Marquis's daughter had treated them was not quite ordinary. Lady Holland was a little at a loss to understand where the girl was going with this. The Marquise's daughter decided to destroy all evidence, fell to her knees beside the table, saying that these accusations were insulting. Irina noticed that the tea kettle was on the edge of the table and was about to fall to the ground, so she made an effort and deftly caught the kettle, preventing it from falling and breaking, thus preserving all the evidence intact. Mirabelle hadn't expected her sister to be so quick, as she stood next to her, and then a second later by the table. Meanwhile, Irina poured tea into a cup and suggested that Lady Shelby drink it, since there was nothing scary in there but the drink. The girl accepted the challenge, believing that she had enough skill to pretend that everything was fine, but it was not as she wanted. She took only one sip and spit out the contents, which shocked everyone. On that note, the tea party was over. The sisters were on their way home, and Mirabelle was very curious as to how her sister knew there was something in the tea, but she didn't want to answer that question. The protagonist was silent and realized that she had no right to fall for such pathetic tricks if she wanted to change the future. Involuntarily, her thoughts drifted to another direction, and she thought about what Carmel was doing now and where they would meet next time. A new day came, and Irina sat in her room drinking tea. She looked into her cup, trying to find answers to the questions of how she should behave with the prince, whether she should make the first move again or let him lead in their dance. Not finding an answer to her question, the girl asked the maids to prepare a carriage for her, as she wanted to go to a place. The girl came to the city as she thought it would be easier for the prince to meet her here. Suddenly, she felt that someone was following her and walking. It made her think that she had calculated everything correctly after all. There were 7 people following her in total, but she didn't understand why. The girl walked into the alley and was about to pick up the blade she had so fortunately taken from the house. Then she lurked and waited to see who would approach her, ready to fight back at any moment. Someone approached her from behind, and the girl reacted instantly, putting a dagger to the person's neck, except that when she turned around, she recognized the person who approached her. It was Carmel in his own irresistible persona. The young man admitted that it wasn't the reception he had expected, but he liked the situation overall. His Highness admitted that he had no intention of hurting the girl, so he asked her not to look at him as some kind of scoundrel. Besides, he couldn't do otherwise, for she had been followed as soon as she left her castle. It became obvious that they were going to have a long conversation, so they went to a quiet and prince-tested place where outsiders would not be able to disturb them. Carmel said that his wound had healed, and then asked if she wanted to ask him about anything else, like who was following her. The girl was curious as to why the young man was following her, but he corrected her and said that he was not following, but protecting, as he believed that there was a significant difference between these concepts. It was interesting, but she could take care of herself and catch those pursuers. Carmel, on the other hand, thought that the girl didn't need to do anything, because among those people was a member of her family's knightly order. Irina quickly realized what was going on and bowed to the prince, apologizing for the inconvenience. Only the gesture was unnecessary, and the young man reminded her who she was from now on, and that she didn't need him or anyone else to bow to her. The prince also informed her that among the pursuers were his men and the Marquis of Shelby. The latter did not please the girl, for Lady Shelby had done wrong and was still plotting revenge. But she decided to think about that later. And now it was more important to come up with a convincing story of their love, because they had never appeared in public together before. The prince wondered if the girl would ask him anything else, but Irina didn't understand what he was getting at, so she asked what question she should ask him. But the prince was not going to prompt her, and she decided to tell him what she had originally thought, for she had no further questions for him yet. So, Irina asked Carmel to pretend to love her a lot, so that he would have no problem becoming emperor, and so that he wouldn't interfere with her becoming empress, since she needs power first and foremost. This explained a lot, but the young man also had one condition, because by and large he did not need a fictitious marriage, he needed a real one, with the fulfillment of marital duty. It was unexpected, because in her previous life she had been so caught up in revenge that she had no time for love and relationships. And now a proposal like this came out. How to react to it properly, she didn't know. His Highness took her silence as a refusal, but Irina began to tell him that it was too early for them to think of such a thing, for she wanted to be not only his wife, but also his secret weapon. Seeing her determination, Carmel said that he had another reason to become emperor, so he accepts her offer. Yes, he was going to help her become empress, but after that, they would play by his rules. Namely, after she became empress, she would only be his wife and nothing more. Carmel caught her confusion, so he clarified if she was just going to take advantage of him and he would allow it. The young man admitted that in the future he wants joint children, because if they have scarlet eyes and golden hair like the main character, he can even love them. The main character looked puzzled as the prince's words sounded like he wouldn't love his children if they didn't look like her. After all, the young man had asked to be called by his first name, because otherwise he didn't see how he could play the role of a lover if she was going to address him by his title all the time. It was common sense, and the girl agreed to address him by his first name, but only when they were alone, for in public someone might be watching them. Meanwhile, at the Blaze family home, Sophie was doing laundry. She did not understand her mistress's behavior, nor why she had not changed her attitude toward her. The girl had thought Lady Irina frivolous since she had gone out at night with a man, and now she had no fear that the maid would tell no one of the incident. Her colleague noticed that the girl sighed often and thought it was because the maid was being disrespectful to her mistress. But Sophie replied that Irina owed her a debt of gratitude. Sophie considered the mistress to be a real shameless woman, but in fact she had no objective reasons for it, except for personal dislike. But this point the girl decided to omit. Mary, on the other hand, couldn't believe that Lady Blaze ran off every night to meet a man and didn't return until just before dawn. Sophie also thought that Mistress treated her badly, despite all her help. But this was all something she told her co-worker in great confidence. Meanwhile, the prince and Lady Blaze were making a contract. There were few clauses, but they were quite simple to fulfill, though the young man asked her if she wanted to add anything. Irina, on the other hand, knew full well that Paveluk would soon revolt, so she asked the prince to make her his secret weapon, meaning she wanted to defend him with her sword. In order to persuade the prince to include this clause in the contract, she promised to fulfill one wish of his in the future, for he was initially reluctant to agree to this clause, considering it reckless. Now that was a forbidden technique, so the guy agreed, but noted that she had to be there to protect him. They made the point, and only then Irina asked what would happen to her if she couldn't fulfill all the points. The prince asked her to promise him that she wouldn't despise him before answering that question. The girl easily agreed to it, not realizing what she was signing up for. After all, she could do whatever she wanted to him if he broke the terms of their agreement. Since that was the case, she asked His Highness to protect her family at the cost of her own life. He couldn't let them die before himself. But if he couldn't keep that promise, he would give her everything he had as a member of the royal family. Carmel didn't take long to agree to that condition. With that taken care of, now it was their turn to create a love story, and they thought for all they could meet for the first time at the ball. The young man thought that a story about love at first sight didn't sound so bad. Thus, they solved all the worrying issues, and the girl got ready to go home, as the knights were most likely already looking for her. Carmel took the contract and said that he was quite annoyed that they had to date in secret, so they should get married soon. After that, His Highness called one guy who will help her, because the protagonist had to hide her abilities and skills, so she can use this night for her defense. At this moment, a short guy named Kasha Kun, who personally served the prince, entered the room. The young man didn't say anything back, but Carmel said that this guy didn't like to talk, so he wouldn't stress Irina out, and she could call him when she needed him. But just as she was getting into the carriage, the young man stopped her and kissed her hand goodbye. After that, he smiled and asked the girl to be careful on the way back home. The prince's behavior made her a little embarrassed, but she promised him to behave. Sir Kasha was in the carriage with her, so there was an awkward silence between them. They arrived at Blaze Castle, and the guy suggested that the girl hang a red handkerchief from the window when she needed his help. That way he wouldn't disturb her, and would only come at the right moment. The protagonist entered the house, while realizing that the idea of a knight was perfect for their situation. At this moment, she saw her sister, who was definitely waiting for her. It was really so, because the girl wanted to discuss with her sister the purchase of new jewelry for the upcoming ball. Suddenly, Irina saw one ring in her sister's jewelry box and remembered that in her past life she had been very poor, so she had sold all the jewelry she had except for the ring she saw in front of her, because at that time it had reminded her of who she really was. It belonged to Mirabelle now, and the girl asked her sister when they could go shopping for jewelry at the new merchant that had recently appeared in town. Irina thought about it and decided that they could go shopping tomorrow. Mirabelle then ran away, and the protagonist rang the bell, summoning the maid to her. But the maid did not come at once, and Irina thought that she had something wrong, but the girl denied it. So Irina asked the maid to help her take off her dress. Suddenly, Mary started asking Irina strange questions. The girl immediately realized that something was wrong here, and asked one last time what had happened today while she was away from home. The answer astonished the protagonist, for Mary confessed that she had heard that my lady went out every night to see some fellow. Irina understood perfectly well that Sophie had started a rumor about her, so she ordered Mary to immediately call her colleague to her. In a past life, Sophie had worked hard for their family until the very end. But now things were different. And for the first time, she hung a red ribbon on the window, withering Sir Kasha. Right now, she needed as much information as possible, so she called for Kun. After that, Irina, accompanied by two maids, went to the annex where Sophie was already sobbing. The maid claimed she was white and fluffy, and Mary had taken her and set her up by spreading rumors about her mistress. Lady Blaze was silent. She looked at the maid and remembered that she had been too egotistical in the past, so she did not expect such a stupid act from the girl. Meanwhile, Sophie on her knees begged the protagonist to forgive her for the last time. But the only thing the girl could do for the maid was to fire her. Morning came. Irina was worried about the incident, but she had done some educational work with the rest of the servants, so no more mishaps were to happen. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Kasha-kun entered the room. The guy informed her that he was working at the estate from this day onwards and apologized for taking quite a long time to come to her. After all, it would be a bit inappropriate for him to come at night, so he had to wait until morning. The protagonist was not angry with the young man. Besides, Carmel ordered him to fulfill any of her requests. Since that was the case, the girl asked the guy to gather information for her about the state of affairs in the Imperial Palace and the power structures in the capital. The main thing in this case was speed and quality. The guy took her wish into consideration and asked permission for a late visit. After all, it would be much faster. It didn't matter to the girl when he would come. The main thing was that he would get the information he needed. Irina decided to take care of the documents so that she could go shopping with her sister, because the day before she had promised the girl to do just that. After she finished her work, got ready, and went to the store with Mirabelle, the girl was delighted with what she saw on the counters. The girl liked one piece of jewelry most of all, which was made of high-quality red diamonds. Nevertheless, Irina wanted to see the rest of the jewelry in the shop, so she followed the merchant, beckoning her sister to her, for she could not take her eyes off the necklace. In addition, the man could make any jewelry of the girl's choice from the stone of their choice. The main character liked the yellow topaz and asked him to make a hair clip in the form of a butterfly. The merchant said that the product will be ready in a week. The girl thought that this jewelry is very suitable for her younger sister. The girl was happy, thanked Irina, and said she would cherish the gift she received from her sister. Sasha, the hopeful one who urged her to survive at all costs. Beatrice, the perky girl who wanted Ebony to stay alive for them too. And Monica, the light-hearted one who told her not to give up or shrinking from the cold and hugging herself. The girl stared at the walls, remembering the faces of her friends. To Dante's surprise, she didn't shed a single tear. The reason was a good one. Miss had promised her they agreed with their friends that they would beg for pity after death when they met the deity. But while they were alive, they would not pity each other. Ebony declared that she knew why His Excellency had brought her here. From now on, the enemies she would have to face were a staple of society and a legitimized inequality that had been passed down from generation to generation in this state. Dante feared that Ebony's resolve might waver when she had to face. Ebony turned to her lord and asked not to worry, for she had already decided that she would fight, would have no fear, no regrets, and would be. Dante took the girl's hands and noticed how cold they were. Warming them, he stated that he did not pity her. As dawn broke, they made their way back to the castle. Juro greeted them at the entrance, bowing his head. This was the end of preparations for the debut of the ruthless and unstoppable Lady Ebony Vonick. All that remained was for the performance to begin. Upon his return, Dante, checking his papers, asked Juro how Ebony was doing. The secretary replied that, given her long time in prison, he thought she wouldn't be able to adjust to Several times each day, Ebony came to Juro with visible interest in one book or another, and many questions about what she had read to better understand the detail. He remembered well the first time he'd seen her. The hunched shoulders, the lost blank stare, and the ashy pallor of Juro had told him of Ebony's plan to make Lady Maester heir to the manor, and Dante wondered why she'd decided that way. Juro remembered her desire, the desperation, obsession, and rage that palpably lived in her heart. He added from her words that although she had agreed to be His Excellency's chess piece, she should not be a threat to him. Dante's response pleased him. After the conversation, he walked down to the carriage outside and met Ebony already ready for introduction. Juro admitted that he had been too hasty in judging her only as a disposable pawn, but Juro, after a pause, as if speaking with annoyance to himself, said that the master believed in her submission and loyalty. The girl felt the responsibility on her shoulders. This was the man who had given her a new life, and Juro repeated for the last time the details of what needed to be figured out at the event. Everything had been thought out. Also, according to legend, she was hired by a higher-ranking person whose identity should never be revealed. The reason she joined the Maester's games is only because she will earn a nice commission. On background and family, one should answer inconsistently, vague, but if anyone doubts her abilities, she should loudly demand that they point out the person who helped the mob get their hands on the Crimson Hall in the Odium Desert. Ebony then asked what should be done when she met with. The answer was ambiguous. Juro said she should try to piss her off by saying that although she was a woman who had failed to produce an. The coachman at this moment gave notice that he could see the carriage of their guards. Pulling his hat over his face, Ebony made her way with the guards towards the manor while one of the military men paid attention to her, offering to carry such a heavy mask for her. The guards laughed, encouraging the girl and saying that she was absolutely right. As they approached the gate, they stopped. The butler greeting them asked for a name. Ebony was escorted as far as Madame Meister's room. The door creaked open, and a lovely lady in black mourning clothes appeared. That's right. The late general's wife was standing before her, a target she must provoke into. Jillian shuddered as she listened to the guest's speech, declaring that she could run from the main gate straight into the drawing room. But she made no reply to this, and asked Nan. Raven flopped onto the couch, spreading her skirt and exposing her shapely legs, exclaiming how impressed she was with the general's modesty. It was the first time she had. Questions flashed through the widow's mind as to who had sent her and for what purpose. Ebony continued to play her part, leaning back against the couch. Speaking of the staff, she also suggested that there should have been more male servants, suggesting that the general had been. At that moment, Jillian flinched at the direct question about her age. Besides, Raven had addressed her by her first name, which was unacceptable when it came to an unfamiliar married lady. With a bright smile on her face, Raven continued to ask uncomfortable questions. This time she asked what kind of wife she was, which she almost got from the furious nanny. Jillian's subdued dress and accessories were not insignificant trifles. This woman was unusual, and she spoke the official language equally well with the men. Jillian answered, though pointing a finger at the widow. Raven exclaimed that it was a perfect coincidence that Jillian could put the estate up for sale. Jillian replied with embarrassment that the customs in this country were not quite so simple. Perhaps Raven was unaware because of her. With a shudder in her voice, Lady Meister asked who Raven was to be so careless as to say such things to her. Ebony, however, Jillian was slowly starting to lose her temper, and that was just what was needed. Raven went on serenely that Babylon was ruled by a queen, a woman who had no husband or child. Jillian jumped up from her seat, urging her to listen, but Ebony continued her monologue as if ignoring the widow. She said that Lady Meister had already gone through all the options in her family. The men who'd told her to sell the estate through the courts, since she had no experience in managing it, to leave the probate business alone. Or maybe it was just those who were. Raven replied that she was not, but the widow was ready to send her out the door, exclaiming that her husband was the greatest general this nation had ever seen. Raven argued that all those rats could easily start an idle rumor about Lady Meister with some unknown man. Silence fell, and with a dead stare, the widow looked at her guest with tears in her eyes, whether from grief or anger. She declared that if these people. Removing her hands from her shoulders, Ebony stated that the men had already come up with a name for all this fun. The Meister Games. That was what they called. Raven took the widow by the chin and looked into her eyes, reassuring her that her employer was not so shameless. He had supposedly told her that he would. So Jillian has only 3 choices: leave the estate and flee, end up on the street with a tarnished honor after the scandal, or take over the estate herself. Like a predator, Raven walked around Jillian. The widow understood what the guest was trying to accomplish, but she also realized that there was nothing wrong with what she was saying. Ebony, holding out the card with graceful, slender fingers, said the widow only needed to choose the right side. Asking to be contacted at the address on the card as soon as Jillian. Stopping at the door, she glanced at the widow again, adding that her secretary worked at the Caboose Casino and she only needed to ask for a man named. The door slammed shut, and behind it, the mysterious lady disappeared, leaving behind no clear things. Only Ebony had finally left the walls of the Meister Manor, and a guard was waiting at the gate. As the girl was escorted to the carriage, the purpose of today's meeting was to show that the widow had another opportunity which she could seize. Ebony, climbing into the carriage, felt the tension that had built up in her. In the carriage, she was saved from falling by the Archduke himself, who was awaiting her return. He put his finger to his lips to keep her quiet, but what he really wanted was for the girl to give an account of the work done. Then Ebony told him that although the owner of the. Ebony continued her tale of how Jillian had listened attentively to her in spite of her suspicions, and Ebony had made her boil with anger as she had been commanded. Scenes replayed in her mind of how the enraged Dante smiled contentedly and leaned back in his seat, and Ebony, removing her mask, asked what would happen if she made a mistake somewhere. The carriage was just pulling up to its destination, and Dante dragged the girl by the arm in the right direction. Ebony stammered that she had done nothing worthy of reward, which, as the Archduke noted, was exactly as Juro had said. As His Excellency pondered, Ebony said that made perfect sense, to which Dante, exhaling, replied that Miss didn't pay attention to such things. And yes, she was the first person to protest when it came to the award. But even Ebony looked around and saw many horses in their stalls, looking at them. When she heard Dante's voice calling her, she looked in his direction and saw before her a magnificent black horse with a snow-white mane. The Archduke said proudly, holding the reins, that it was payment in advance for work. The girl sighed in amazement and reached out her hand to the massive muzzle of the horse. Little Ebony thought that if she got her own horse, she could do whatever she wanted with it. But even so, it was a problem. Nanny said that but the nanny reassured the girl, assuring her that one day she would be able to ride a horse. Ebony put her arms around the horse's neck, clinging to him with joy and happiness. The animal bowed its head to her obediently. Dante added that this animal is amazing, so it's worth trying to be owned by an owner that won't disappoint him, such as the Queen of Babylon, to be able to ride him. And the other servants were just busy looking for her. Ebony gave the horse the name Raven, the same as the heroine's name, which led her to meet the animal. That job is that the previously played Mrs. Raven must visit one place this coming weekend, namely the home of Marcus Siddell, the social club run by the short man. Pay much attention to it. A few days after the visit to Lady Maester's estate came Saturday, the day on which the second act of the play. It was special in that the top was separate from the skirt. As the women of Nova are active in social events, Ebony thought that even though the mask was just a fragile trinket, she was surprisingly filled with the feeling that she might be someone she wanted to. She is Raven now, a raven flown in for a glint of gold, a mysterious woman working for His Excellency and the Joker in this game. It's as adjusting the hat on Ebony's head, Juro briefly outlined what needed to be done for today. He noted that His Excellency, hence today Ebony would have to fool two parties, Marcus Siddell with all the nobles of Calcas, and Viscount. The girl set off alone toward the club. Upon arrival, her coachman Jackson stopped by, announcing with a smile that they had arrived at the rendezvous. Ebony smelled that he smelled. In the distance, a man appeared who clearly stood out from the crowd. Yes, it was definitely Viscount Pierre of Nova. They greeted each other in the Viscount was somewhat taken aback, but shook the girl's hand with a smile, remarking that she was an interesting person, and his employer had not mentioned that he would meet such an eccentric broker. Raven assumed that was unusual for him, and realized that no one had warned her that the jeweler had his own employer, so she should take a closer look at him. With a smile, she invited him. It was nearing evening, and they had arrived at the right place. There were already a lot of people around, mostly. It is a 3-story establishment, a place for men's recreation, to which the passage for women is. They approached the entrance where they were greeted by a man who clarified if Raven was a woman, to which she wryly asked the counter question if she looked so. The Viscount asked what the man had said, not understanding the local language, to which Raven replied that the beautiful custom of Calcas did not allow her to go there only because she was a woman. Raven declared loudly for all around to hear that this was no mere affair, but a bargain worth 1,000,000 gold pieces. She pointed her finger at the man at the door, exclaiming that the people around him whispered. The sum was not insignificant, and it was a huge mistake on the part of the greeter. But the man was adamant, stating that the main rule one could pretend to be one, but that would mean that she would not be able to be a mediator and work on an equal footing with the Viscount. It might lead to skepticism from the jeweler, but if she ventured to pursue it, she might expose her identity. Ebony felt a lump in her throat at the agony of. Shortly before this predicament, Juro and Dante met exactly as planned in front of the Foreign Ministry building in Calcassus, thinking he was probably late since his secretary was already waiting for him there. Dante began to ask how the first part of the plan was going, to which Juro replied that based on Jackson's report, Viscount Pierre Ebony liked her very much. Dante grinned, asking if Ebony even knew the rules of such games. but the prudent Juro said he'd shown her a few moves beforehand in case they came in handy. But what was really interesting to him was that the presented, fictionalized image of Raven suited her so well. Juro's pocket watch clicked, and he glanced at it, asking the coachman to speed up. Then the secretary admitted that Raven had been denied entry to the club. Juro had just left to pick up her master, just as she was beginning to have a heated argument with whoever was greeting the guests at the entrance. This was disastrously ruining the whole plan. Juro didn't understand his master's intentions, for they had just arrived at the club. Dante knew that Ebony had been denied entry only because she was a woman. The jackals that dwell in this filthy place are only interested in filling their mouths with gold. The secretary was about to say the worst of it, that they would have to let the Viscount go in there alone, but Dante interrupted him by Ebony was really in the throes of thought at this point. Her thoughts were distracted by the rumbling that was going on all around the square near the building. She didn't know what she should do, even unwittingly began to act like Ebony. And if she didn't wake up, the mask would slip and the plan would be over. She squeezed the dress and asked herself how Raven would have acted in this situation. Right. She wouldn't even have to make an effort. She wouldn't be embarrassed by anything. She would have just smiled, like a predator who was In a moment, the girl laughed out loud, looking up at the man who had so stubbornly refused. Though the man tried to answer her that the girl would make things so difficult, she looked at him with a bloodthirsty glint in her eyes and continued to ask. There appeared several large ornate carriages, from which a crowd of beauties appeared, laughing loudly and glowing with merriment. They all went straight to the entrance, exclaiming that they were dancers from Sabrina's establishment, and that 12 of them were. A man in the crowd resented their presence, but one of the ladies serenely replied that they had come here by invitation, and her words were taken up. The passage was cleared for a man of a slightly shabby appearance, who came out accompanied by 2 ladies, who, laughing, the men lined up, haphazardly removing their hats and bowing, wondering how the Archduke himself had honored them enough to come here. The girls who accompanied Dante giggled and asked if the men were greeting them too. At his job and not an amateur. As they approached the entrance, His Excellency asked the reason why the girls were still not inside. Ebony could smell the alcohol on the gentleman's breath and covered her nose with her hand. The girls, showering the man at the entrance with attention and embarrassment, began to lament that they had not been given an open door even after they said they were His Excellency's companions, and they couldn't go back to their store. Then, looking at him coldly, Dante ordered him to get out of the way and open the doors immediately. The intimidated man had no choice but to obey him, and he promptly opened the doors in front of them. In a flash, the entire crowd of beautiful maidens, led by the Archduke, poured into the club, accompanying him joyfully and unconcernedly. At one point, Dante turned. The Viscount adjusted his clothes and motioned that it was her and Raven's chance to get in too. She agreed and walked forward with the jeweler, not believing the Archduke had gone that far for her alone. It was not the right one, but the guy was already taking off his coat. It was pure truth. When they arrived in the red light district, Dante was determined, though Juro doubted the need to do such a thing. They had shown up at the house with the secretary covered his face in embarrassment so as not to look at the girls, and Dante, stripping off his outer garments and throwing off his tie so that his shirt looked ragged, began to giving himself a vulgar appearance. He described what he expected from the girls. They are to accompany him. Well, the plan was working. Yes, so much so that Raven had no trouble getting in. She grabbed a vocalized wine from the waiter, blending in with her surroundings. The jeweler excitedly asked if it was the Archduke, saying he had an amazing aura. The girl One of the guests approached them, asking if Raven's presence here was special. He noticed the 2 of them still outside, expressing delight at their presence. To think, a man with 1 million gold from Nova and a lady wearing a mask. With a smile, the guest was surprised at such words, for the girl was too young to be entrusted with such a sum. He assumed it was only because of her beauty. Raven chuckled at his remarks. Another man joined their conversation, noting the accuracy of Raven's words and asking for more details, for he was still outside. The man crossed his arms, wryly noting that even children knew that. Raven, not confused, suggested with a smile that he probably also knew that Kalkas, compared to Babylon, lacked jewelry. She asked the man to remember the voiced thought that the people of Babylon were more skilled in jewelry. She pointed out that while Kalkus was becoming known for its military might, making great strides in metalworking and there was an uproar. People began to discuss the words of the mysterious girl, who kept talking about the end of the 7-year war with Babylon and the time that would be freed up to devote to development in the field of minerals and stones. For now, the war for jewels had already begun, and presence was now extremely necessary. She pointed confidently at the Viscount, claiming he was here because he believed in Kalkus as much as she did. The jeweler embarrassingly— The men on the sidelines marveled at the way she spoke, but the only thing that stopped them was that Raven was a girl. One of the men laughed, picking up on her employer's cleverness, while the other realized the girl was being sarcastic. Nevertheless, the situation was already in Raven's hands and had attracted many eyes and ears. Suddenly, a certain man approached and clinked a vocalized whine with Raven, expressing his curiosity about the face behind the girl's mask. Ebony froze for a moment, recognizing Marcus Siddell himself in front of her. Then Marcus offered to make an outrageous wager. If Raven won, he promised to help her contact the most reliable mine in Calcassia. But if he won, the girl would have to throw off everything else she was wearing, right here. She should not be ignored so insolently. There was noise and laughter all around, putting both Raven and Viscount in a humiliating position. It seemed to be Marcus's favorite move. Even Marcus liked the mysterious stranger's answer, and, placing his wineglass on the waiter's tray, he explained. Raven incredulously asked how she could be sure there wasn't a catch, to which Marcus assured her that he wasn't that short-sighted, and if a scuffle like this suddenly came up, this club would be The Viscount tried to quiet his mediator, saying that she should not go so far, but the girl was determined. Holding out her glass to the worried jeweler, Marcus was amazed and of course agreed, though asking if it would be okay. Raven rightly pointed out that if they dragged out the game, they would tire and the fun would be over. In fact, she had already calculated all the outcomes of events already. Two stood at arm's length with their hands on their cups. At the croupier's command, they began shaking their containers of dice. Raven was more excited than ever. The players stopped on command and showed their dice. The crowd around them gasped when they saw that Marcus's dice showed completely different values, while Raven's were 6 without exception. After the game, Marcus laughingly remarked that Viscount had a very versatile broker with an unexpected talent for gambling. He hadn't experienced. After looking at the wine in his glass, the jeweler brought it to his mouth, saying in between that he had heard of 2 exceptions. Marcus noted that the jeweler was absolutely right, but there was one thing worth noting, and that was their number of not their 2 but 3 people, and each of them is as outstanding as now. As the Vicomte had said, he was looking forward to meeting the personage who would be introduced to him by such a highly intelligent man as the Marquis. While they were talking about, one of them said that the Marquis of Siddell must be nervous, but retained his cunning charm, and also asked his interlocutor if he had seen what had happened. His companion put his finger to his lips, suggesting that this conversation was not for a public place, so he nodded toward the balcony and, using that as an excuse to leave, asked if he had a cigar. The Vicomte's attention was focused on Siddell now, and if she stepped away for a minute, it wouldn't be a problem. Since one of the men had said something about cigars, it meant they'd be out on the terrace. And while the men were looking for someone to borrow matches from, Ebony walked straight to the balcony like a shadow. Well, it wasn't hard to get in, but it was harder to get out. As luck would have it, one of the ladies happened to have matches, and the men were already walking onto the balcony, ready to talk. Reluctantly smoking, they didn't seem to notice. Then the man who had started it all went on to tell about the Marquis of Siddell's secretary, who kept talking to some fellow before, the one who was of the knights the late general had raised. And yet the listener did not understand the connection between these details, for these families were of quite different ranks. This was most suspicious. As he exhaled his cigarette smoke, his interlocutor realized what his informant was getting at. It was an indirect declaration of war. So Marcus is backed into a corner, so he resorts to such a reckless method to take out the widow. It was all in the palm of my hand, the scandal that erupted around the night. The interlocutor, smoking, was indignant at how Trial could agree to this, and was about to add something when he heard a rustle from somewhere below and turned his attention to him. asking his informant if he heard anything. The day after the event, a joyful Ebony went straight to the Archduke's office, apologizing for entering without permission. Picking it up, he looked at Ebony with a smile and expressed his joy at seeing her. She looked, in his opinion, quite chipper today, perhaps positively influenced. Dante gestured for her to sit down at the table with all the goodies and tea so that she could tell him more about it. Earlier, Ebony recalled, the Archduke had said that the Viscount had come to Calcas with good intentions. Unless it was an Raven had even received a small commission thanks to this deal. Dante sighed in surprise, noting and praising her accomplishments even as a middleman. The girl smiled briefly and put the cookie. As she considered the next cookie in her tongs, she said that in conversation, he had brought up the subject of success. Ebony looked questioningly at Dante, expecting an explanation. But he dismissed it as unimportant and asked her to tell him more about Sidel. Then the girl after finishing decorating the cookies, Miss said that it seemed that the Marquis's secretary had held a conversation with a knight from the lower nobility who had nothing to do with the Sidels. Unfortunately, Dante thought about it, noting that if it was true, it was valuable information. Just in case, he asked her if she was sure that the information hadn't been meant for her to hear on purpose. To which she smiled embarrassedly and admitted that she had been under the sofa on the balcony the whole time. There was a brief pause, breaking the cookie in half and handing some to her. He fed it to the girl and asked her what she would, but if word got out, it would be unstoppable, as Ebony knew from her own experience when she'd been slandered by the whole community. A conflict involving a person of such high rank that Sidel wouldn't dare oppose, such as royalty, would be perfect. Of course, the first was that those who aimed at the estate would not be able to ridicule Widow Meister, and the second was that they would smoke on lies about His Excellency owning Madame Gillian and the estate. This is the easiest way. Nevertheless, Ebony noted that the plan would certainly tarnish His Excellency's honor, so she apologized for her rash ideas. Dante, pulling a cracked cookie off Ebony's plate, he held it out to her mouth, apparently enjoying watching her eat from his hands. Ebony was no longer afraid to look the Archduke in the eye and even smile, which certainly pleased his eyes. The man immediately agreed, and Ebony asked why he was so sure of her. It was a question that was somewhat difficult to answer. Dante explained his point of view with things that in this world defied logic. Irina didn't understand where all this stuff had come from. Ebony remembered a similar feeling when she'd played craps with Sidel at the club yesterday. He explained that people give the phenomenon many names, and when something happens that puts them in a stupor, they call it magic or a miracle, and then asked if Ebony thought their relationship was the same. There was no doubt. They were gifts from Carmel. At this time, Juro came to the servants laboring in the field near Meister's estate with a crate and praised a certain madam for her work. The woman sprang to her feet and ran up to him. The woman happily noted the Archduke's attentiveness and mused aloud about how nice it would be if His Excellency would just take over the estate. It was rude of her to say such a thing. However, she believed that it didn't matter to the peasants who the owner was, as long as they stayed fed and warm. Moreover, the woman was annoyed to report that the current owner had been She brought the terrible news that the mistress of the house had whipped her elder cousin only yesterday, and that there had been a commotion in the neighborhood. Juro could not believe his ears, hoping he had heard it. The news reached His Excellency at once, and now Ebony, in the form of Raven, was rushing with all her might to Meister's manor, not believing that Gillian was capable of beating her cousin. Knocking on her door, she introduced herself to reassure her. The door in front of her, a crying, helpless Gillian with a mangled face and neck was almost on her knees, begging for help. It seems that something completely different from what society was telling her had happened. But she had to return the jewelry. A few days ago, Raven had crossed paths with the widow near the bank. Ebony said that their constant meetings were fateful, but Gillian was still wary of the mysterious girl. Naturally, the meetings were not accidental at all, because Raven remembered that Gillian had never contacted her secretary. She thought it was embarrassing, so she offered to meet when she was done with her business or just give up the estate, which the Raven who had flown. The widow said the same words to her family with full confidence. Then her relatives became furious and told her to shut up and never say such nonsense again. The girl remembered all the acts of violence against her. Pass it to the prince. So the shocked Raven came and asked who had done this to the poor girl. The crying and frightened widow replied that it wasn't her older cousin, and then her father and older brothers. As expected, the family framed her, but Lady Maester wept helplessly, clinging to Ebony, saying only how tired she was, how hard it was for her to cope with such a burden. Ebony, listening to her speech, involuntarily remembered herself, that desperate situation when the whole world is against you and does not want to hear a word from you. The days she spent in prison with the thought of being hanged any day now were unbearable, especially knowing that you are innocent. Plus, your word will not be believed simply because you are a woman who has minimal rights that are not even close to a man's capabilities. Such is the fate of the disobedient. Jillian said that this time it ended with a simple beating, but if it happens again, she doesn't know what to expect. Because even in her dreams, Jillian screamed how scared she was, and if she had known it would hurt so much, she would have sat quietly like a mouse. Raven assured her that she would make sure that Jillian wouldn't regret not running away by becoming her ally. Raven assumed that even if the widow Ebony reminded her that she had an employer and told her that this man was above any other participant in this vulgar game for the late general's estate. He is only in it to keep everyone in line. Jillian begged the mysterious lady to help her, beginning to offer a reward in the form of the estate's income, even her own life. She was willing to give anything to get out of the series of terrible events that would lead to her death. The widow Raven liked her attitude, and she vowed to take revenge on them with Lady Maester, saying also that sometime later, after a few important events, Jackson along with Raven were on their way somewhere and were having a conversation. Coachman Jackson asked, "Of course," Ebony observed. The widow was a little frightened by who Raven's employer actually turned out to be, but His Excellency had spoken the right word. Jackson was glad to hear of the positive outcome of the meeting, being still surprised that together they drove straight to the racetrack where the race was now taking place. The men crowded around the fence, watching to see which horse was ahead. In the midst of this crowd, Raven recognized Ebony couldn't believe, looking at the man, that he had once been a promising knight. Now he was a drunk, a betting addict. The late General Meister took pity on him, and so at his own expense paid him an expensive prosthetic hand made of metal. Exactly replicating this, Ebony stared at him, realizing that he, having received so much help and support from the late general, was going to hurt Jillian, his wife. Jackson explained that in addition to crazy people, this world is full of selfish people who don't remember the good that was presented to them. Ebony's fingers twitched. For some reason, she was afraid of men who get drunk and yell at everyone around them. Such men made her remember all sorts of unpleasant things from the past, like her late fiancé or the wardens at the prison. Ebony declared that they had nothing to fear, for they were no longer human, but trash. With a firm stride, she strode toward the former knight and snatched the bottle from his hands. The crowd murmured, and the man exclaimed that the girl in front of him was out of her mind, calling her crazy. But she mentioned Marcus Siddell's name. Gert leaned threateningly toward her, asking through gritted teeth who she was and what she thought she was, already beginning to threaten and put his hand behind his back. With Jackson, they stepped behind the building where no one would hear them. Gert asked how she knew so much that she'd even gotten to him, to which Raven replied that Marcus Siddell's name had connected them from the beginning. So obvious. Then the mysterious stranger asked firmly if the former knight intended to talk. If not, she would immediately go to the Meister's clenching his fist. Gert asked what she wanted him to do, to which he received a clear answer that it was in the best interest of their side for him to step away from the case now. Gert decided that the girl in front of him was just as eager to take possession of the manor, so the best option would be to directly demand money from the Marquis. Raven, in response, scattering her hands, said that the man was not only stupid, but also naive. Gert was furious and ready to lunge at the girl, but he stopped when he saw Jackson's hand on the— Raven continued to mock, saying that, according to the man's words, she could easily go to the Marquis and tell him that she knew a great deal, demanding money for his silence, to which he would gladly agree as Trail had one last chance to make a decision. He would choose the one who was using him for personal power struggles, and then kill him at the end to take all the information with him to the grave. Raven assured him that Gert would get much more from the second decision than the Marquis was offering, as well as a guarantee that he would— Complicating matters was the fact that the Marquis had already given him a substantial deposit. Taking out his blade, He exclaimed that better terms could be promised by anyone, but in an instant, Gert appeared behind her with a naked blade, intending to finish the girl on the spot. She didn't even have, but luckily Jackson stopped the man with a deft movement. There was a crack, and then a shrill howl. Gert's arm was broken. The knife had fallen out, and the arm dangled as if it had lost control. That she was from the Blaze family. Jackson, leaving the screaming man behind, took Raven aside and apologized for such a rude escort. And the plan was simple. Jackson nodded and adjusted the gloves on his hands, turning back. A street in the middle of town, people relaxing in a pub, and a girl in a red dress and a raven mask hiding from view behind a cabin door. But it turned out that the house had not been chosen at random, for it belonged to Jackson himself. Then he splashed the water on the night, and he woke up immediately. Gert opened his eyes and saw the same two silhouettes that had been demanding information from him. His hands and feet. Gert, twisting his head and trying to free his hands, realized he was trapped. Leaning back in his chair and resting his head against the wall, he recognized that the two men in front of him had understood the situation perfectly. Then the man assured her that nothing serious was required of him, only to meet Lady Maester at the right place when she came out, and then to offer her his comfort. His task was to gain her confidence by reminding her of the worst part was that if she remained vigilant, he would have to kidnap her. Ebony looked at the man in horror, leaning toward him and giving him a menacing look. She pulled it all together. It appeared that Gert was going to approach the wife of the late general. Gert exclaimed that it was not so, for he wanted to take responsibility for Jillian, for as a widow she could not protect her estate, and so it could be taken over by anyone. It would be better to join forces with the Marquis and get money from him, and Jillian, though at first she would be angry, maybe hate him. The former knight believed that when a woman gave herself to a man, she would fall in love with him, and then she would be grateful to him. She couldn't conceive a child because she was living with an old man. Raven, on the other hand, recognized Gert, who considered himself a hero, as the dregs of society. Jackson asked the mist, of course, out of desperation. Gert threatened that they would both be in trouble when the Marquis found out what they had done, to which Raven firmly replied that he was of no value to Marcus. There were no limits to the man's elimination, and they could lock him up and leave him for dead. Raven had ordered Jackson to take care of the matter, for she was not the one to pass the final judgment on this traitor. Holding hands, Jackson made up his mind and again raised his firm hand over Gert's head. The next moment, he placed him unconscious in a barrel in an unknown street. A short time later, Raven arrived at Lady Maester's estate. She greeted her as if she had been expecting her. Jillian asked Nanny to bring tea, but Raven stopped her. The widow admitted that this time she was able to hold up better than before, which couldn't have been more gratifying. She reassured herself but Raven wasn't happy with that. Though Jillian had endured this time, the next might be her last. She told her to forget about the tea, for she had come to the widow's house with the request that she prepare Sometime after all this had happened, Ebony ran into the dining room where Juro had just finished his meal and asked him what her next assignment was. The secretary exhaled, noting that although he knew Ebony was a fair person, she really didn't have much patience. The girl clapped her hands on the table worriedly, saying that they might have locked up trail, but many people had spotted her with him leaving for the racecourse. Juro replied cryptically that His Excellency was right, and it would be better to discuss the next plan with the Lord. Ebony nodded, realizing that His Excellency would take responsibility for her, so she would have to discuss everything directly with him. Besides, Ebony didn't quite know what he was doing. He guarded the Archduke, owned a casino, ran a huge inn, and looked like a drunk. Then he said, calmly, that it was better to ask His Excellency, for the secretary was from Calcasieu, but Jackson was a foreigner, as was the scowling chief behind him. Juro had expected an interrogation, but to his surprise, Ebony simply agreed and turned. What was even more unimaginable, she wasn't going to go to His Excellency, for she saw no point in going out of her way to dig up information. Turning around, she looked at the surprised secretary, who couldn't take his eyes off her, and asked if that was right, then left him in the dining room. This conversation took place before Raven arrived at Maester's estate, where she asked the widow to leave the mansion immediately, and told her that Jillian would be staying at the hotel for the time. Lady Maester fidgeted, not understanding why she didn't have time to take any of her things with her at all. But Raven's plan was to pretend they were just going for a walk, but they were really running away. So it was better not to attract attention, for they did not want to alarm. The mysterious girl's employer, Archduke Schneider, is to take care of Jillian while she stays at the hotel. The nanny could also go with them, for alone she would be harassed at the mansion. It remained to think of an excuse for the outing. Raven had everything in hand, so she asked to inform her relatives that Jillian was going to buy a black dress. The widow asked why, and then she had already learned about the bank. Jillian grinned, and then fell to her knees, laughing hysterically and covering her face with her hand. Their country was truly unbelievable, for people weren't organizing a posthumous medal ceremony. Raven lowered her gaze to Lady Maester, assuming they were trying to forget the pain of defeat as soon as possible. But Lady Maester, crying, asked how they were going to get to the hotel. Raven held out her hand to help her up and told her that the carriage was ready and they would make several transfers on the way. The hotel that Archduke Schneider had prepared for Jillian Meister was a first-class establishment and a place for long stays for nobles, merchants, and foreign ambassadors. There were only military men around, which was not good. Nanny heard that they were hired, but their worries were in vain, for on their arrival at the hotel, they were met by Jackson, who pointed to the room where His Excellency was all. Dante had arrived here early, so he entered the chambers first. Besides, he had already prepared a memorial dress for the banquet. The widow thanked His Excellency and promised to remember the instructions. Dante added that Raven had already taken care of the man who. Lady Maester even asked Raven if it was true, to which she received an affirmative answer that the man was acting on Marcus Siddell's orders. Was horrified. Raven lifted herself up, intending to reassure the girl, saying that they had moved Lady Maester here to protect her from the hands of the Marquis. Raven paused for a moment, then called out the name of Gert Trail, the late general's apprentice. Of course, the widow remembered him and could not accept the situation. She remembered well the day her late husband had asked her to look at the finished prosthetic arm that was intended for Gert. The general had told her that his apprentice had returned crippled. Jillian sincerely respected the general because he was a kind and loyal man, believed that this feeling was enough to spend her whole life by him. Raven revealed that Gert planned to approach the lady by mentioning the late general, and then kidnap. Jillian finally couldn't take it anymore. Her thoughts overflowed into her head, confused and painful to her heart. Unwilling to accept it all, she cried, exclaiming how Gert could have done such a thing. He's dirty and unfair. This time she was lucky to have allies like him and Raven, but she couldn't know for sure what would happen in the future, so she had. The fight for survival will do them more good than comforting speeches. They don't need to feel sorry for each other anymore. Raven replied that the man would be acquitted, as none of his plans had been set in motion. Then Jillian said she would give him anything he wanted, except her own life, if he would help her wipe out that obnoxious traitor. Dante took an apple from the platter, the fruit of sin and strife. Then, Jillian said that if things had gone according to the enemy's plan, she would have been expelled from the family because of her defamed body and tarnished reputation. For women in Calcasieu, instead of ending up so humiliated, I'd rather be a murderer. That phrase was echoed by Raven, who stood beside her. It had been decided. Dante finished the apple, and it was time to tell the Archduke of his wishes. He stepped aside and asked if Jillian would not mind a fair exchange. Realizing that the widow thought the Archduke would ask for the mansion, he grinned and said that, however, she has never managed it herself, which made things difficult, because to inherit it, Jillian needs the deceased's will and an experienced administrator. Dante declared that no one would dare object if she said he was her guardian. Now the Archduke was ready to name what he wanted. He paused, looking at the faces of the girls that were eagerly awaiting his decision. Stepping closer, he smiled and pointed his hand towards Ebony. The Meister Academy is the late general's treasured residence, to which he dedicated his life. He spent all his days at. Of course, the widow wasn't going to object, but as far as she knew, the fact was that the Archduke never attended social gatherings. The real purpose of his participation in the Maester's game was to put the academy in the hands of Raven, a mysterious woman whose identity Jillian could not. After the conversation, Ebony and Dante returned to their estate and strolled in the garden. However, Dante was worried that because of his sympathy for the widow, Ebony would bring up his injuries. There was an awkward silence. Ebony tilted her head, pondering the words of Dante, who, a few minutes later, announced loudly that he was starving and wanted. Ebony smiled, realizing that the formidable-looking Archduke was more caring than people usually thought. She obediently followed him into the dining room, where the chief shook off his hands and resented the fact that the gentleman never showed him an ounce of respect. Even now, Dante wanted Senko to throw. It changed Senko's mood instantly, and he rushed into the kitchen to do his duty. Dante politely pulled out a chair for his subordinate and sat down. When she had first informed His Excellency that she intended to take over the academy, of course she had thought that the Archduke himself would be its owner, but for some reason he had decided otherwise. His Excellency explained that the Meister Academy might have a solid reputation, but it was small and. But while Ebony was talking, she suddenly realized one thing, remembering the sweep. His Excellency had said he wanted. The girl realized that by putting such a valuable institution in her hands, he must be planning a coup d'etat. The Archduke handed Ebony the utensils and told her to eat well, and then they would continue brainstorming. By this point, Senko had returned with many dishes in his hands, which he held with, but not everyone was doing so well. At this time, Marcus Siddell stood at the window of his estate, tapping his fingers nervously on the sill and thinking about what was happening. He had recently. Marcus felt as if he had been electrocuted when the image of a charming and enchanting lady with amazing charisma popped into his mind. The first witnesses claimed that she had pretended to be a mourner who had. Marcus had tried to track down the mysterious lady, but when she appeared, she always changed carriages to cover her tracks. His fist slammed against the surface of the windowsill. The Marquis could not. At this point, Irina put her acting skills to work and said that Lady Shelby had said terrible things to her that evening, such as promising to ruin her face. At the sight of His Excellency, the man at the reception desk even jumped up from his seat, standing up straight and directing all his attention to the Archduke, as if he had not noticed his companion. Dante, frowning, pointed out that he wasn't actually alone, and the matter for the man wasn't with him, but with Lady Meister. The girl confidently stated that she was here to take a. Carmel walked over to Irina, hugged her, and asked her what she was doing here. After all, she had previously asked him to tell only the truth. The only thing he didn't understand was why she hadn't told anyone that she was his woman. He admitted that he'd heard about everything people said about her, so he didn't understand why she hadn't mentioned the problem to him in the beginning. He then turned to the other aristocrats and made it clear that he and Irina had been in a relationship for a long time. But it was not their plan to make it known before the official announcement. But he did not know that there were such rumors about his beloved. Elena hated Irina so much that she didn't realize what she was doing and started accusing the prince of having an affair with his subordinate. And besides, there was a man who claimed to have been in the girl's bedroom. His Highness then asked his knight to bring the sack to the hall. Gennard brought the sack, placed it in front of Elena, untied it, and the prince asked about the man who had spread rumors about his beloved woman. Carmel waited for an answer, for if he was wrong, anyone who spoke such an abomination about Irina would meet a similar fate. The protagonist noticed the noble's negative reaction to His Highness's display of cruelty, and it wasn't going to go down well with Carmel. To smooth out the sharp edges at least a little, the girl took the young man under her arm and said that she was fine. She was sure that everyone understood, so she asked the prince to go with her away from here. Lady Shelby's legs gave out, and she crouched beside the severed head in the sack, shaking with fear, anger, and disgust. Yet she was not about to leave Irina and Carmel alone. Meanwhile, the young man and the lady had found a secluded spot in the garden where they could talk quietly. Carmel taking off his jacket and laying it on a bench for the girl to sit on so that she would not soil her dress. They sat down next to each other, and the young man confessed that he had found out about the rumors that had been going around Irina not long ago. So he had sent Kasha-kun to her, and he himself had come as soon as he had finished all the urgent matters. Carmel didn't like that she hadn't told him anything about the rumors, because he thought they should discuss such matters together. The young man had asked to speak to her about such things in advance, for it had cost him a great deal of effort not to kill everyone at this banquet because of their words to her. Irina realized that His Highness was not joking, considering that he had brought a severed head of a man in a bag to the reception. So she was afraid that at this rate, Carmel could easily turn into a tyrant, and she would not like that. He did not think that he had done something bad. In fact, he punished a guilty man, and people would not consider him a tyrant for that. With this was all clear. Then remained one question: what the young man would do if the rumors were true. The answer was simple. He would kill all the men with whom the girl was. If that didn't stop the girl, he would kill every man in the country to get her to pay attention to him. This admission discouraged the girl. Nevertheless, she was grateful to Carmel for his help. But Irina was still worried. After all, the Shelby family had quite a lot of influence in the empire, so their hasty actions could have bad consequences. Carmel agreed that he would no longer act on his own and would consult with Irina. But now he just wanted to lie on her lap, because it turned out that he had rushed to the girl for 3 days and 3 nights. So he was very tired and wanted to lie like that for a while. She did not object to it. A new day came, and the girl was thinking that perhaps she should tell her younger sister about the prince, for he was going to pay them an official visit. So she pulled herself together and informed Mirabelle that she was in a relationship. This surprised her sister. Mirabelle was surprised that her sister's choice was His Highness, but she was happy for her sister and was eager for more details. And on the other hand, the girl was a little offended because Irina kept everything secret all this time. Suddenly, the girl thought and concluded that it was the prince who gave her sister dresses and jewelry. It was all wonderful, but Mirabelle wondered if her sister loved her admirer. Irina had a prepared answer to such a question. She said that she loved him very much. Besides, the girl was planning to marry the prince, so she was going to talk to her father in the evening and discuss the matter. Her father came home in the evening, and it was clear from his tone and shouting that he wasn't thrilled with the news. The girl wasn't quite sure what to say to her father, for she had no idea what he meant. When father and daughter were alone, the man asked where all those horrible rumors about the girl came from. The count saw that his daughter didn't really understand him, so he clarified, asking about her and the trailer. He had time to report that there were rumors in high society about her inappropriate behavior, and that His Highness was killing nobles for her sake. Irina realized that her father knew absolutely everything, but the thing he was most concerned about out of the whole story was the crown prince. Irina made no secret of the fact that she and Carmel have been dating for a long time, but they kept their relationship quiet for a long time. She couldn't say anything about her relationship before because she wasn't sure if they would be together in the future or not. The Earl grabbed his head, thinking that his daughter wasn't even thinking about marrying the prince, but just spending time with him. At that moment, Mirabelle burst into the study. She begged her father not to be so cruel to her little sister. The girl thought that the love of Irina and Carmel was enough, so her father should not have behaved so rudely and cruelly to the girl, for in their empire there was favor for the lovers. The count could not forgive his eldest daughter for trespassing on the crown prince's heart, but Mirabelle could not understand why the prince was more important to him than his own daughter. The girl believed that the prince treasured Irina, as he wanted even to meet their family. The protagonist confirmed her sister's words that Carmel was going to come to their estate the other day to meet them. The man, though not enthusiastic on the subject, was willing to allow them to marry if it was His Highness's will. The conversation was over, and Mirabelle decided to drag her sister away with her, not really listening to her father about how she had upset him a lot with her behavior. Irina thanked her little sister for her help, and she told her that she would always be at her side. So the day of the prince's visit to the Earl's estate arrived. Irina came out with the servants to greet him, saying she was glad to see him. The girl explained that since it was an unofficial visit, she was meeting him alone. Her father was waiting for His Highness in his study, and the couple was greeted in the house by an enthusiastic Mirabelle and a frowning Earl Blaze. After that, they all sat around the table, Carmel and Irina trying to act like lovebirds to make everyone believe their love story. After dinner, the men decided to play a game of chess. The men retired to the study, and the maids and Mirabelle pelted Irina with all sorts of questions and compliments. When the maids left, Mirabelle asked her sister if she wasn't curious about what the prince and their father were talking about. The protagonist was certainly curious, but she was more worried about how the men would communicate in general. At this point, she was very much surprised by her younger sister, who suggested that she go with her to a secret place where she could hear very well everything that was going on in her father's study. Mirabelle took her sister into a secret room, where indeed all was well heard. Her father, meanwhile, praised the prince, for he played chess very well. Nevertheless, Count Blaze felt that his eldest daughter was not the best match for the crown prince. Perhaps the man was right, except that Carmel reminded him that he would be the one to make the decision here, not the master of the house. Besides, the count didn't really understand their circumstances, for Carmel didn't desire Irina, but desperately needed her. The protagonist herself did not know how to react to the words of the prince. After all, on the one hand, he followed their plan, and on the other, he was the first man who went to such a step for her. Mirabelle didn't expect her sister to come back to her so quickly, and Irina felt that she might have even more problems if she stayed there. So the only right thing to do was to go back to her sister. The girl's gaze did not hide the fact that Irina blushed a lot. Why would it suddenly, whether it was a sharp illness? The protagonist pretended that she was fine and that her sister, it all just seems. The girl sat down in the chair. She didn't understand why she still couldn't pull herself together after the prince's words. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Carmel entered the room. The young man smiled as he said that he had come to see her because he wanted to see her very badly. He knew immediately that this was his favorite girl's room. Irina asked him to take any seat he liked and wait for her while she brought tea, but the prince declined the tea as he had time to drink it with her father. Today was different, and for the first time, the girl felt awkward sitting next to the prince. Carmel was the first to break the silence and ask the protagonist why she was acting strange all day today. Irina didn't expect her behavior to seem strange from the outside, so she assured the prince that she was fine. He only smiled, noting that she was too cute right now. Unexpectedly, the girl thought for the first time about what Carmel would do if her family opposed their marriage. But the prince was too close, and she abruptly stopped thinking about important things. And he asked her not to move as he wanted to pull something out of her hair. Carmel leaned too close, and at that very moment, Mirabelle and two maids entered Irina's room, for the girl wished to have tea with her sister. The girl realized that she had come at the wrong time, covered her face with her hands, and with the maids hurried to leave the room. The protagonist sharply pushed the prince at arm's length and called her sister. Carmel had no choice but to agree to Mirabelle sitting with them, so he pretended he wanted to get to know her better. The tea party was a success, and the prince invited the sisters to come and visit him. Mirabelle was very much pleased at this proposal. The young man admitted that he wanted to stay longer, but he had more things planned for today, so it was time for him to leave. Meanwhile, back at his estate, Pavlik rejoiced at the results of the investigation. The man had learned that Irina Blaze and Carmel were in a strange relationship. Plus, he was pretty sure the girl owned a special ring. His servant wondered if there were any other options besides Irina as to who the ring could belong to, because anything could be possible. Pavlik hadn't expected anyone to question his conclusions, but after the servant apologized, then the man ordered to find out as much information about the girl as he could. So the myth said that dragons could use strong magic, and among the heirs of the imperial family, there were many who inherited dragon blood. Pavlik was certain that it was Carmel who became the first heir to the throne in a long time with dragon blood in his veins. The man believed that his nephew had special powers because of the dragon blood, so he could interfere with his plans. It turns out that His Highness could fulfill one person's wish, and he believed that person was Irina, so they became close. Meanwhile, Irina was working in her office. It had started to rain, and Mary, who had brought her tea, was going to go check the windows to make sure the rain wasn't causing trouble. Not 5 minutes later, the maid returned. She was calling for Mistress to come with her as something had happened and she needed to see it. Namely, Irina's older brother Derek had come home. The protagonist ran towards him. She was worried that something had happened to her brother, for he had traveled a long way to visit her in the capital. The young man couldn't do otherwise. After that letter his sister had sent him recently, Irina became nervous as she didn't know how her brother would react to the news that she was dating Carmel. It seemed to her that her brother took offense at her for such important news that she had written a letter instead of telling him in person. The surprising thing was that Derek said she could date whoever she wanted to date, because she wasn't a little kid anymore. But Derek was unhappy that her sister had chosen Carmel, whom the oracle had predicted would have an unhappy marriage. The problem was that no one knew about the prince's prophecy except the nobles, and his brother was so angry that he wanted to tell someone else's secret in front of the servants, and that could have unintended consequences. But Irina wasn't going to give him a chance to mess things up either. So she offered to take off her cloak for starters so he wouldn't get sick, then sent her brother off to take a bath, offering to continue the conversation afterward. So they did. Now Derek admitted to his sister that he was very surprised by her choice. The young man realized that he could not influence his sister's decision, but he offered her to become not the first but the second wife of the prince to avoid the curse. But for Irina, it was not an option at all. Moreover, it was impossible. After all, her main goal was to become an empress, so she didn't want to discuss the matter further. Derek hadn't expected his sister to want power so badly, but she said that since she was with His Highness, she wasn't going to be his servant. His brother could not understand his sister. He did not expect that a girl of her age was willing to live an unhappy life for the sake of power. Irina, on the other hand, believed that nothing bad would happen to her since she had the best brother, a sweet little sister, and a strong father. In addition, the girl confessed that she loved Carmel and asked Derek to bless them. Having received consent and from his brother for marriage, the girl was absolutely happy. A few days passed and Carmel invited Irina and Mirabelle to visit his palace. Mirabelle was happy as it was very beautiful all around, and it seemed that they were not in an imperial palace but in a fairy tale. Irina suddenly caught herself thinking that she wished such quiet days could last forever. Suddenly, they saw the dragon statue, and the protagonist suddenly remembered how many years ago she was here, and the boy asked her to keep one item until he could return. Then he handed her a small ring and promised to come back for it. Meanwhile, Carmel stood at the window and recalled the past, and it turned out that all his childhood had been spent in the servants' quarters, for his mother had been a servant. At the time, he had no idea that his father was the emperor, as his mother constantly bowed her head in front of Sullivan, in no way showing what they had in common. Although he was the emperor's first son, no one considered him the heir to the throne, and his mother constantly asked for his forgiveness. She reminded him every day to apologize to everyone and to behave modestly and inconspicuously. But he couldn't understand why he had to behave that way, because he hadn't done anything wrong. For as long as he behaves in this way, he will live, and in time the blood that flows in his veins will help him rise to the top. But while he is small, he must endure and remember what his ultimate goal is. But at the time, the prince's only wish was to be free. Like the birds in the sky he watched when he went out to the park and looked up into the sky. After a while, there was a turning point in his life, as the dragon blood that was inherited began to manifest. Then the boy did not realize what was happening to him. During the metamorphosis, the prince experienced extreme pain, but eventually a blue bead appeared that granted the fulfillment of one cherished wish of the wearer. That period of his life was difficult for Carmel, but when the emperor saw the blue bead, he immediately recognized him as his son and heir to the throne. Then his life changed 180 degrees. The sad moment was that his mother left him forever, although she promised that she was leaving for a short time. But in the end, she left for good and never came to him again. Carmel wasn't a stupid kid, so he realized that his mom had just been killed to keep her out of the way, and he was living like a cage that was lonely and scary. His father once confessed that as long as the young man was in the imperial palace, he would not be able to protect him from danger, so he would send him to the frontier without regrets, to take part in active warfare. Carmel did not understand the logic of this decision, because on the battlefield is much more dangerous than in the castle. The emperor did not care about the safety of his son, because if the blood of the dragon flowed in him, it was not so easy to kill him. He felt hatred for his father for the first time because he only cared about dragon myths, not his own child, and he was a coward who couldn't even hold a sword. And one day, the guy went out into the garden, lying on the grass and looking at the blue sky. He reflected on the fact that his life did not belong to him, as suddenly he realized that there was someone nearby. But here, outsiders could not enter. It was a beautiful girl who got lost in the park. Then she appeared suddenly in front of the prince and asked him to show him the way. She assumed that Carmel was working in the garden and might know the way to the emperor's castle because she was walking in the garden and got lost. The guy was extremely surprised because it had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him so rudely, because he was the heir to the throne. Since the boy didn't answer, Irina concluded that he had recently worked here and was also lost in the garden like her. Carmel, on the other hand, didn't know what to say to her, as it was his last day before he was sent off to war, and he was just walking in the garden, not expecting a story like this to happen to him. The girl, on the other hand, was offended, as he didn't want to talk to her, and he didn't understand why he had to do something like that. Irina, on the other hand, took him for a servant, which meant that the guy had to answer her, but he decided that he was on strike and would not talk to the prim aristocrat. Though Irina stopped pestering him, she didn't go anywhere, but began to look at the unusual pink flowers she had seen for the first time in her life. The boy hadn't expected that someone could react so strangely to flowers, but the girl had taken offense at him and didn't want her to talk to him now. Irina confessed that she was scared to walk through the park alone, and Carmel realized that she was a very nice girl. Then Irina confessed that it was the first time she had seen such flowers, and then asked the boy if he had ever been to the Imperial Palace, and he replied that he had never been. But in fact, he had not only been, but lived in the palace, and tomorrow was his first time being let outside of it, except that he would be going to the battlefield. Irina was sad that the boy had never been anywhere, so she began to tell him about the opera and the delicious buns from Uncle Charlie's shop. She was the first to suggest he go just for a walk and show him lots of interesting places. The girl introduced herself and wanted to know the name of the strange boy, but he did not want to answer, saying that he had no name. Irina was so naive then that she believed that her new acquaintance had no name. She felt sorry for him. The girl promised to tell her mom about him so they could take him back to her from that home. Irina's kindness and involvement made Irina Carmel want to cry at that moment. He couldn't believe that this girl felt his pain and desire to get out of this house and be free. Yet she was dragging him by the hand, telling him he could work at their house. Irina wanted the boy to go with her. Then she could take him to the opera, buy him delicious buns, and show him the most interesting places in town. They were still walking around the park for a long time when suddenly Irina started calling for her mother, and she realized that she had to run so her mother wouldn't scold her. So she asked the boy to hold on a little longer until she could talk her mother into picking him up. But at that moment, Carmel was well aware that he would likely never see this naive girl again. So he gave in to the impulse, stopped her, and decided to give away the only valuable thing he had. Irina hesitated to take or not to take this thing, because her mother taught her not to accept gifts from anyone. Then the prince said that it was his mother's ring, and he gave it to the girl for safekeeping. Because of the circumstances, himself cannot keep it. The boy asked her to keep this ring until they meet again. This option suited the protagonist quite well, and she said that she will keep this ring for him and then give it back when they meet again. He didn't believe in dragon myths, but then he decided to try his luck and decided to make his one wish. At that moment, he wanted something for the first time for real, so the pearl answered his call. Carmel asked the ancient dragon power to protect Lady Irina Blaze and keep her from dying. For the first time, he wanted to survive the battlefield to meet Irina again, to fulfill his promise to her. That day, he was happy, and then there was the war. Every day, there was a real hell. He was saved from despair by the image of Irina, which he kept in his memory. Even when he turned into a monster, he always thought of her, because it was her he wanted to return to more than anything else, not his father. Their first meeting after separation was not as he had imagined it, and on the whole she had forgotten him. Nevertheless, she offered to take herself as his wife. He was well aware that Irina did not understand how he really felt. At that moment, he was told that Irina had arrived at the palace and would soon come up to him, and in a second the girl burst into his room, paying no attention to the butler and maid, for she was quite angry, for Carmel had forgotten to tell her something. The girl remembered their very first meeting, and now resented the fact that he had not told her then that he was the crown prince and was fooling his head. The young man kicked everyone out of the room, for now he wanted to be alone with the girl. He was happy as she finally remembered him. Irina did not understand why the prince hid his origin, because she and her mother then he really was looking for a long time. The main character was a little offended, because then she was very much worried about him. Irina abruptly calmed down, looked at the ring on her finger, and said that he had told her then that it was his mom's ring. It was, and the girl had decided to return the ring to its rightful owner since that was the original deal. But His Highness was not going to take the ring back, after all. As long as she wears it, she is fine. Besides, they will soon be one family. This speech sounded strange, so she questioned what he meant she would be safe as long as she wears this ring. The prince admitted that as long as the girl wears this ring, it will, at least once, be able to protect her from any danger. He wondered if as a child she had come to the palace to find him. It was so. She had spent days asking the palace servant about him, but the girl did not want to admit it and said she had not been looking for him long at all. Irina noticed that after her words, the young man became sad and thought that he had something going on. Suddenly, the girl remembered that she had come to see him with Mirabelle and left her outside, so she needed to pick her up. She was glad she had met him again and thanked him for being nice to her sister. and even inviting her to visit. Carmail, on the other hand, didn't think he was nice or friendly. In fact, he was doing everything he could to please her family. Carmail held back and said that he had made some delicious cookies for the girl, and if she wanted to try them, the servants would bring them immediately. Besides the cookies, Mirabelle and Carmail's opinions agreed that Irina should sit next to the prince. The protagonist didn't expect her sister and the prince to conspire. Nevertheless, she didn't think there would be a problem if she sat next to the young man. A servant brought tea and cookies. Suddenly, Carmail suggested they attend a puppet theater performance together. Mirabelle was already excited. At this moment, a servant came to the prince and informed him that a spy had entered the empress's chambers, but that he had not been heard from again since that moment. The young man said he was fine, but he had some important business to attend to. But the girls were to have a good time. If they needed anything, they could go to his servant. Mirabelle liked the prince's foresight very much. Irene was glad of it. Meanwhile, Elena Shelby was angry, for her reputation had been completely ruined, and she blamed Irina Blaze for all her troubles and misfortunes. The girl stopped being invited to social receptions. Nevertheless, the Empress herself expected Lady Blaze to destroy Irina. Daughter of the Marquis was going to join forces with the Empress Ophelia. The woman knew very well that she and the girl were relatives, though not the closest, but relatives, though she had not paid Elena much attention until now. The girl assured Ophelia that all the rumors that went around in high society about her and her behavior and actions were not true, and she was simply slandered. Elena was counting on the Empress to help her solve the problem, but the Empress only said she was taking her to the imperial palace as a maid. Everyone knew that the Empress's maids were gaining power, so she felt that she could become the Empress's right hand. Elena agreed to it, but the Empress said that in the morning her men had found and caught a spy who wanted to ruin her relationship with the Crown Prince. So Ophelia believed that Lady Shelby would help her to restore order in the palace and would always be on her side. The woman was going to keep the girl under her as long as she was useful, but as soon as she did something wrong, she would kick her out without regrets. Carmail went on business, and the sisters, with his permission, went for a walk in the palace. Because Mirabelle liked it very much around, Mirabelle behaved as if she were at home here, so she decided to enter the chambers, which seemed to her very beautiful, but she was not allowed there by the guard. The girl did not understand why she was not allowed in, but the man said that these were the Empress's rooms, and it was forbidden to enter there without an invitation. Suddenly, Irina saw Elena Shelby leave the Empress, which was strange in itself. Before that, there were rumors that the girl had locked herself in her chambers in the manor and hadn't been out for a long time. It was strange that she was now dating Ophelia. However, Irene decided to think about it later as she needed to keep an eye on her sister. So she suggested that her sister go back, have a good meal, and watch the puppet show. The girl agreed. The dinner and the performance made Mirabelle glow with happiness. It was wonderful. But here was Irina worried about where Carmail was so far and if he was doing well. The protagonist took her sister to her chambers, but she herself wasn't going to sleep yet, as she wanted to see the prince more than anything right now. At that moment, a servant came to her, who was most likely Carmail assigned to her. He asked why the girl was still awake. The protagonist was sure that this guy knew where His Highness was, so she demanded that he take her to the prince immediately. Irina was not satisfied with the refusal, so she told her to be led to Carmail in such a tone that there was nothing left for the servant but to do her bidding. The man led the girl to the young man. She could not think properly, for she was worried about what had happened to the prince. They went into one of the rooms, but Carmail said that although it was his palace, it was full of spies, so they had to be extremely careful. Irina's daring behavior was certainly liked by the young man, but he was well aware of what they would think of the girl if someone saw them together that night. The prince realized that the girl was not thinking at all about the consequences of her actions, but she demanded that he tell her what had happened during the day. The gist was that the men she caught on the bridge confessed that Ophelia had sent them, but he needed proof, so they sent a spy to the Empress's chambers for them. But there was no news from him, so Irina concluded that he had been caught and killed, though in her heart she hoped for the best. At this point, Irina made a decision. She demanded to be given different clothes, as she was going to search for the missing one with the prince. Meanwhile, Mirabelle was about to take a bath before bed, so she decided to let the maid go, as she considered herself long past the age of a small child. Mirabelle began to prepare to take a bath. Suddenly, she stopped abruptly as she saw the injured man she had seen earlier on the floor. She didn't understand why he was lying unconscious on the floor and tried to figure out what had happened to him and why he was in such a state. At that moment, the girl heard some shouting outside the door. It was the Empress's personal guard who had come and was demanding that the door be opened and the room searched, as they claimed that a dangerous criminal had escaped. Mirabelle, though naive, was not stupid, so she immediately realized that they were looking for a guy who was lying on the floor in the room. Meanwhile, the guards started pulling the doorknob. It was locked. The maids were asking people to stop doing that, as the prince's valued guest was in the room. The girl realized that at this rate, everything would end badly, so she decided to hide the stranger. For this, she helped him up. For this, she helped him get into the bathroom, because the first thing to do was to hide the traces of blood. Mirabelle asked the man to bear with him for a bit if he didn't want to be caught. Unfortunately, she didn't have the best ideas to hide him. Luckily, there wasn't much blood on the floor, so it was practically invisible unless you looked closely. She then abruptly pulled her dress down to her underwear, as otherwise no one would have believed she was going swimming. She was just in time to do so, for it was at that moment that the guards burst into the room. The girl screamed and ordered them out. Though they had left the room, they still wouldn't leave and asked that she get dressed and let them into the room to search the premises. At this moment, the prince's personal knights appeared in the corridor. They asked the Empress's guards if they didn't realize whose chambers they had just entered. One of the insolent men started to get indignant as they had a personal order from the Empress and were being resisted, but the other suggested he back off. All the men had gone, and the maid informed Lady Blaze, saying that she was now perfectly safe. Mirabelle confidently and clearly ordered the maid not to enter, for though she was fine, she was in a bad mood. The maid was not going to make trouble for herself, so she offered to call Irina. But the girl refused, as she thought that her sister would be very shocked by what had happened, and said that she would tell her in the morning. Mirabelle added that she was in a terrible mood and didn't want to see anyone else today, so she forbade everyone from entering her room. After that, everyone left. Kashakun started climbing out of the tub. He was worried about the girl and said she helped him for nothing. The young man realized that it would be better if the girl did not get involved in this story. She did not understand how he could say such a thing, since he himself could just kill a minute ago. Meanwhile, the prince and Irina were arguing. She demanded that the young man lend her clothes, as she wanted to help in the search, and he flatly refused her. The protagonist didn't know exactly who the spy was, but she realized that he was probably hiding from his pursuer somewhere in the castle or on the grounds. She realized that she couldn't act as Lady Blaze, but under Ren's guise, she could act as Lady Blaze. At this moment, his knight came to His Highness with a report, saying that the Empress had sent her guards to his chambers with a search, saying that they were looking for a dangerous criminal. Partly this was good news, for it meant that their man had managed to escape. Yes, the prince's men had managed to kick the trackers out of his rooms, but they continued to hang around their territory. As soon as the knight left, Irina and Carmel went back to their conversation, and the girl insisted that the lad give her clothes, or she would proceed with her own methods. His Highness recognized her abilities, but here he was afraid that she, with such great talents, was getting into huge trouble. Yes, he remembered perfectly well that the real girl was just that, but he also reminded the girl that in any situation, her safety and life should come first, because if she got hurt, he would just go crazy. Except the girl thought that Carmel's safety and life was paramount to her. Her words made him madly embarrassed and flustered. Plus, she said it with a nonchalant look as if it was a common thing to say. Besides, it was after this that he relented to the protagonist and showed her where she could get clothes and armor. The girl quickly changed and they went out into the garden together to search for the spy. Ren was recognized by one of Carmel's men, for they had been together on the flower bridge. But what was interesting was when he had had time to start working in the palace. His Highness made up a story about Ren going undercover on his secret errand, so he can't show his face to others. At that moment, the prince's other men ran into the garden. Megan was glad to see Ren again, and also to work with him together. The knights reported that they had searched the southwest part of the castle, but found no one there. Since that was the case, they had no way out and had to go and search the northern part of the castle. Besides, the prince didn't like Ophelia's men continuing to hang around his territory. Carmel didn't want to think bad thoughts, but he didn't deny the possibility that the Empress's guards might catch his man, so he sent more of his men there to take him away from his opponents in that case. His Highness was not afraid of a direct confrontation with his stepmother's men, because the main thing in such a case was to kill everyone without leaving any evidence or witnesses. At this moment, Irina realized that Carmail was a very good strategist, as this way he was showing his opponent that he was not going to give in and give up. He also wanted someone to keep an eye on the Empress's men. Irina volunteered for this task, except that the prince ignored her and sent Janard, who didn't look happy about it. Irina didn't understand why she wasn't given such an easy task. After all, she was the prince's best swordsman. At this moment, a servant came to the prince. He conveyed to him the Empress's wish and orders, and asked permission to search his rooms, to which Carmail replied that he was sleeping a deep, unbroken sleep. The servant did not understand anything, so His Highness added that he was asleep, not going to wake up, and therefore no permission could be given. It came to the servant now, and Carmail said that since the Empress's men had no permission from him, they had turned into bandits who had broken into his palace. This served as a wake-up call for Irina. She killed the man who was hiding in the bushes and said she would go to the palace and kill the rest of the bandits. The rest of the knights froze in place, and Carmail reminded him that Ren wasn't the only one who should be doing this job. Those understood the hint perfectly and ran to help their colleague. Meanwhile, in the prince's chambers, Kashakun came to his senses and sat up on the bed. Mirabelle came over to him. She was glad that the young man came to his senses quickly, so she offered him a drink of water. He, however, did not appreciate the girl's impulse, as he refused the water, saying he was fine. But the girl ignored this, poured water into a cup, and handed it to the young man, saying that he was too pale, so he needed a drink of water. If with water they have clarified the situation, but the guy did not want to voice his name, as both the girl and he will be in danger. But Mirabelle was stubborn when she needed it, so she persuaded the young man to introduce himself, because she will not tell anyone what his name is. It will be their secret. Under such pressure, he couldn't resist and introduced himself. The girl was happy. Besides, she really liked the stranger's name. Kashakun tried to stand up, but he was in a lot of pain, for his wounds still hadn't healed completely. Nevertheless, he managed to stand up, for he wasn't used to wounds with his job. Besides, he needed to leave so the girl wouldn't get in trouble. As the young man approached the door, Mirabelle stopped him, saying that she had saved his life and now he owed her, so she wanted him to fulfill one request of hers. The girl introduced herself and asked Kashukun to meet her again when his wounds were healed. He neither refused nor agreed, but just silently left. Meanwhile, in the garden, the search continued. Irina began to tense up at the fact that one of the knights kept following her. It was Megan. He didn't understand how Ren had noticed him. After all, he was walking very quietly. The girl did not understand what the man wanted from her. Whether he decided to bully her again, as then on the bridge, it turned out that the knight wanted to make friendship with her. After all, they were like brothers, working side by side for the crown prince. The girl didn't see anything wrong with friendship, so she agreed, and Megan brightened up, thinking they were now friends forever. At that moment, they heard the enemies approaching, drew their weapons, and were ready to send everyone to the other side. They caught who got caught and who got killed pretty quickly. Megan, on the other hand, noted that Ren's fighting skills were at a high level, but the girl thought she was far from perfect. Irina was well aware that this was not her maximum. She had fought much better in her previous life, so now she needed to get in shape. The knight assumed that she was fighting the prince himself, for he occasionally arranged practice fights with strong fighters. Megan said that His Highness beats even the best fighters, and everyone as one after training with him almost cries and is exhausted. Besides, the man believed that Carmail was stronger than all of them put together, for even in times of war he had mercilessly slaughtered enemies that even they were sometimes terrified of. After finishing their task, Irina and Megan came to the prince, who was not happy that they had taken so long on it. The protagonist explained that the bandits had run far away, so it took them a while to catch up, capture, and kill them. Suddenly, the knight put his hand on the girl's shoulder and praised her for a good job. This gesture did not please Carmail, and he ordered the knight to remove his hand to smooth the edges. Irina said that they had not caught all the bandits, and she would take care of that now. But the crown prince thought otherwise and sent Megan alone to perform the task. The girl did not like this behavior of her fiancé, because at this rate her identity will be quickly revealed. But he thought that she should thank him, because he was able to restrain his emotions. At this moment, Geronde ran up to them and reported that Kasha-kun had been found. The young man was put to bed, the doctor sitting beside him, when the prince entered the room. Once the guy realized that Carmel was in the room, he sat up in bed and said he was fine. Kasha-kun was sorry and felt guilty at not being able to follow his master's orders. His Highness asked his subordinate to stop self-defeating and move on to active treatment. Irina also exhaled a sigh of relief as Kasha-kun was unharmed and virtually unharmed. It was morning. Irina was having tea with Mirabelle, and she almost began to shake with anger as her sister told her about being seen by the Empress's guards in her underwear. The girl didn't understand why her sister hadn't told her earlier, but the girl lowered her head and apologized to her for it. The girl asked her sister not to worry because she was fine, but Irina saw that she looked as if she hadn't slept all night. Mirabelle couldn't tell her her secret, so she lied, saying she had trouble sleeping in her new place. Irina was worried about her sister's mental state, so she regretted not killing everyone who had caused her little sister to suffer yesterday. In the meantime, Ophelia's brother came to visit. He demanded that she be active, but the woman did not understand what he thought she should do. The man believed that his sister should go to the crown prince and punish him and his men for torturing her subordinates. But the problem was that according to all and sundry, the prince slept soundly at night, so he couldn't interfere in their affairs. This case was essentially irrelevant, as she wanted to make Redfill the next emperor, and kept Paveluk under control to do so. But Carmel's return from the war ruined everything. This was bad. Plus, there were rumors that the daughter of the Blaze family and the prince were getting married soon. But the man had a plan to ruin their wedding. Except that Ophelia had ordered her to stay out of her brother's prince's business, and he could marry whoever he wanted and whenever he wanted. And all because he'd rather have Irina as his wife than someone from the Kraus family, who had quite a bit of influence in their empire in the trade field. The man didn't believe that anyone in their right mind would choose to marry Greta. After all, she had divorced her husband because she had many lovers. Nevertheless, he did not understand why his sister would allow the daughter of the head of one of the knightly orders to enter the family, and the curse had long since dissipated. Ophelia, on the other hand, was sure that Irina would not be able to get much power and influence, since she would be the prince's first consort. Now the man began to understand his sister's plan. But then he wondered if it wouldn't be better if the prince didn't marry at all. But this was impossible. As the emperor didn't have long to live, he wanted to marry the crown prince by any means necessary. So the empress wasn't going to cross her husband just yet. Besides, it would be more fun to give Carmel what he wanted first and then take it away. At this moment, Redfill came to the empress's chambers. He reported to his mother that he was carrying out everything she had instructed him to do. The woman scolded her son for his rash actions and asked him to restrain his impulses until he became emperor, though he didn't like it, but promised to be more careful. Ophelia asked her son to be quieter than water, lower than grass for a while until the rumors faded. Meanwhile, the Blaze sisters had returned home and were met by Derek. It was obvious that the young man had been practicing in preparation for the fencing competition. But when the carriage pulled up, he came out to greet them, demanding that they tell him what had happened at the palace. Mirabelle started chirping about how the imperial palace was very interesting, and the prince is very good to his sister. You can see right away that he loves her a lot. She decided that she would go and get some rest, and then suggested that Irina go somewhere else together and take a walk. The main character also decided to take some rest from the road, as she was also quite tired. Derek said they would see each other at dinner then. Miguel met her in the house. He said that she had received many invitations, and she had to check them all. Among many letters, she saw one in a red envelope and wanted to read it first. It was a letter written personally by the emperor and addressed to her. Irina was greatly surprised, but it turned out that this envelope was brought by an ordinary messenger, so the butler did not understand the girl's reaction. The protagonist praised Miguel for the work he had done. She herself realized that this letter was unofficial, so there was something to consider, because in this letter the emperor invited her to a secret meeting with him. The girl realized that everything was strange and serious, so she decided to inform Carmel of what had happened. While Kasha-kun was sick, his duties were being performed by Durand. He came to her call, apologizing for such an early visit. It turned out that after her letter, Carmel ordered his men to take her immediately to the castle. They quickly arrived at the imperial palace. The girl followed Durand and realized that she was starting to get used to the place. The man led her to the armory. The girl suddenly heard a familiar sound and saw that Carmel was on the training field practicing fencing. Watching His Highness, the girl realized that he was much better than she had imagined. With his abilities and skills, the young man was not inferior to Pavlik. Irina realized that if Carmel continued to develop his skills and abilities, he would be able to easily defeat his uncle in battle. Only after a few minutes did the protagonist notice that His Highness was staring at her intently. Carmel admitted that the girl looked at him so passionately that he almost dropped the sword from his hands. Irina was embarrassed and said that she had been watching his movements and had no other motives. He was making it up. She asked him to get dressed and come to her room, and the young man suddenly realized that she was embarrassed because it was the first time she had been in such a situation. The main character said she grew up in a family of knights, so she was used to this sort of thing. Since that was the case, Carmel grabbed her hand and asked her to stay, and then he picked her up and held her against him, telling her that she would soon be his wife, so there was no point in him hiding his nakedness from her. Still, he let her go since he needed to take a bath after practice, and the girl asked him not to joke about her like that again. After that, they met in the room in full parade, and Carmel reminded the bride that she wanted to discuss something with him. She took out the Emperor's letter and asked His Highness to read it. Truth be told, he was a little surprised. Nevertheless, he realized that his father clearly wanted to meet with her and to do so as soon as possible. And the way the Emperor chose to do it was because he wanted to talk to the girl without Carmel present at the meeting. It was interesting. Irina concluded that Emperor Sullivan was going to say something important that he couldn't say in the presence of his son. Carmel told the girl not to worry, because she would have to say what he came up with, because basically, the guy had already told her father that he wanted to marry her. In addition, the young man warned Irina that his father was obsessed with the legends of the Rupand Empire, which meant he would ask if Carmel had made a wish related to Irina. After all, the father believes that he once gave the girl a ring with a so-called blue pearl that could fulfill one wish of his. Irina didn't believe in these fairy tales and didn't understand how a grown man could believe such a thing. Carmel asked to say that he had given her a ring, saying that the man she would marry would become emperor, and about the wish that he would promise to change the empire for the better with his own hands. Irina, though she didn't understand what was going on, but she hoped it would work. The girl felt that the guy was hiding something from her, but she did not question him, and he was glad that this time she came to him for advice, instead of acting alone, as it was before. They finished talking, and the prince decided to take the girl home on horseback. Irina gave the prince credit, for he remembered that she was very fond of riding a horse. Everything was fine exactly until Carmel brought the girl home, for there she was met by Derek and menacingly asked what she was doing now. The young man pushed His Highness aside and helped his sister off the horse, saying that a lady should not ride a horse in the arms of a man. After that, the men met, but the atmosphere between them was very tense, although the protagonist tried to protect her fiancé from her brother. Irina asked her brother to come into the room as she wanted to say goodbye to His Highness in private. Carmel couldn't help but notice that he didn't like Irina's brother at all. She said that wasn't the point, but that her older brother was just worried about her. The young man admitted that it was their first meeting, so he forgave him for such behavior, and the girl thought about the fact that perhaps Derek would be considerably less lucky when they met again. And then the prince added that he was glad that all these years the girl had grown up among people who loved her. It made her very sad. Time flew by quickly, and Irina arrived to meet the emperor at the palace. At this point, she realized that the emperor was really going to have a secret meeting with her, as she saw no one but walls and portraits on the way. They sat down across from each other, and the man confessed that he had ordered the cook to prepare many different dishes for her, since he didn't know what she liked. The emperor did not go around in circles and asked at once if she was really dating his son. The girl confirmed it without hesitation or doubt. There was nothing strange or unusual in their conversation so far, so she said that Carmel was treating her very well. Sullivan wondered what the girl's father thought of her marriage to his son, for all the aristocrats knew of the oracle's prophecy. The girl said they didn't care, but the emperor informed her that there was another family who wanted to marry their daughter off to the crown prince. But that was beside the point, and Sullivan asked her if his son had given her anything special. She said that Carmel had given her many gifts, while fixing her hair defiantly with the hand on which she wore the very ring. The prank was successful, and the man immediately noticed the ring, and Irina said the prince gave it to her when he proposed. It was important for the emperor to know what his son had said then, and the girl told him the story that Carmel had made up for his father word for word, omitting nothing. It was obvious, though unbelievable that the man believed her, and the emperor was well aware that he had no choice but to refuse the second applicant for marriage to Carmel, as he had not expected such a move from his son. The protagonist really didn't understand what was special about this ring. Sullivan said it could fulfill one wish for his son, so she should keep the object as her own life. It looked strange from the outside, but the emperor said that the girl would find out everything when she became part of their family. But for now, she should wait a bit. Nevertheless, he had one request for the girl. She was not to tell of the ring and his son's words to any living soul. Irina asked the emperor to tell her more about the ring, but he said he would do so only after she and the prince were married. And then Sullivan proposed to hold the marriage ceremony next month. Though Irina was a little surprised at this decision, but said that they really had better get married soon. Carmel, on the other hand, was waiting for Irina downstairs. She ran to the guy saying that the emperor had approved their marriage and they would be married next month. Driven by emotion, the girl took the prince's hands, and that made the young one very happy. And Irina promised to hug Carmel when he became emperor. Soon it was announced that they were soon to be married. The girl was even a little surprised that no one interfered with them and did not put sticks in the wheels. Mirabelle was happy for her sister. She knew full well that the prince and Irina would marry, but she didn't think it would be so soon. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing, but Irina was most worried about the wedding dress, so she asked her younger sister to help her with the dress, giving her complete freedom of action. Irina was worried that Mirabelle would have to take care of the estate's affairs after she married, and she wanted to make her sister's life easier in the future. At this moment, Kashu-kun came into the office window. The girl didn't think that he was already working. After all, he hadn't fully recovered yet. The young man relayed to her that the emperor's family had decided that the wedding ceremony would take place in Baloo Square. Kashu-kun was about to leave when he heard a familiar voice. Mirabelle was talking to the butler, reviewing a job application for a single person. Batary Kobin, who was Paveluk's man, was employed at the Blaze family estate, and the place was necessary for him to follow the protagonist. In the meantime, Lady Lawrence came to visit Irina and congratulated her on her marriage. Irina could not but thank the girl for her help at the imperial ball, and afterwards, for it was with her help that the protagonist managed to cope with the rumors. Lady Lawrence thought that it was not her merit. Besides, the prince had done most of it, and Irina and Carmel were a very handsome couple. But this visit had another reason, namely Lady Shelby, who was accepted into the imperial palace as a maid. The girl was worried about the protagonist, since now Elena had power and could do anything that came into her head. Irina thanked Miss Lawrence for her concern, and she was going to return to the south soon. But the protagonist thought about it and asked her friend if she could stay in the capital for her sake. Irina, after her marriage to the prince, wanted to offer Miss Lawrence to be her first maid in the imperial palace, as the protagonist was well aware that she needed to assemble a team of proven people to be able to confront the empress. Because Miss Lawrence was the daughter of an earl, she worried that she was unworthy to be near Irina. But to Lady Blaze, ancestry did not matter, for Lady Lawrence was the only one she could trust. Hearing this, the count's daughter cried. As it was the first time someone said such words to her, it influenced her decision. So she decided to stay in the capital and help Irina, trying her best. Having finished talking, Lady Blaze escorted Lady Lawrence to the carriage and she drove home, while the protagonist herself suddenly noticed a man in the courtyard of the manor. Unfortunately, she did not recognize in the new employee jewelry shop merchant Batary Kobin, which upset the young man, the girl, and did not understand what this man forgot in her estate. It turned out that he wanted to change jobs, but he was deceived, so he had to quickly look for a variant with accommodation and housing. Irina did not suspect anything wrong, but warned the man to work hard, as preparations for the wedding were about to begin. Bathory hadn't expected her to have connections to Lawrence County, so he realized he needed to keep a closer eye on the girl. Time went by and Irina was doing household chores, realizing that she needed to choose a person to manage all the maids. She had once given her word to the nanny not to bother her, but no matter how it went, she was the best person for the job. It happened in her past life that after growing up, she never saw her babysitter again. So now it was up to her to find her. Since that day, the work had become overwhelming. It was difficult to live at such a pace. So Irina was tired and worried about whether she was doing the right thing. Mirabelle reassured her and said that the girl should arrange everything the way she liked. not someone else. One day, the protagonist called Kasha-kun to her place. The girl wanted to hear news of her investigation. The man came to report to her that he had determined who had broken into Mirabelle's room in the Imperial Palace. A boomerang came to each of them. One got caught gambling and had his arm chopped off, and the other just got beaten up badly by someone. Irina thought it was an oddly fortunate coincidence, but Kasha-kun had offered to kill the men if such punishment wasn't enough. But the girl thought that was enough, so she wasn't going to revisit the matter. The girl noticed blood on the sleeve of his shirt, but Irina was wrong. It was the blood of another person the guy had been assigned to deal with. She realized he was continuing to do all the dirty work for the prince. The young man also had a question for the lady. He noticed that they had some new faces on the estate, it was true, for there were not enough hands to prepare for the wedding. Kasha-kun asked her if any of the newcomers seemed strange to her. The girl replied that the butler and Mirabelle checked each candidate, so there shouldn't be any problems. If all was well, Kasha-kun said he had to leave, then quickly as always, vanished from the room. At this moment, a butler entered the study and brought a letter from the Imperial Palace to the lady, as the letter was from the second Prince of Redfield. After reading the letter, Irina had a bad feeling as the second prince asked her for a meeting. The girl asked the butler to write that she could not accept the invitation to meet, as she had a lot of things to do in preparation for the wedding and did not have time for anything. Nevertheless, Irina found time for a trip to the city with her sister. She also noticed that the girl had grown up a bit during this time. Mirabelle wanted to grow up as quickly as possible and become a beautiful girl, not to be a cute child. Her sister concluded that the girl had met a man for whom she wanted to change. Soon, the girls arrived at the clothing store. They had samples of fabrics and dresses prepared in advance. When the Blaze sisters went into a private room, they noticed that Carmel was already waiting for them there. Unlike her sister, Mirabelle was not surprised by his appearance, as she herself had contacted the prince and invited him to come and look at the dresses with them. His Highness was excited about this invitation. Plus, he had a free day today, so he would be happy to help pick out his bride's dress. Suddenly, Irina realized that the prince was a bit resentful of her for not contacting him lately, which was why he hadn't told her anything about his arrival. But she wasn't quite right, as Carmel couldn't be offended by her for long, so he asked to sit next to him, and the girl was embarrassed, though she realized there was no reason to be. After that, the store employee showed the guests 3 models of wedding dresses they picked up for the bride. All 3 dresses were very beautiful, and the girl couldn't choose one of them. But Carmel swept her up, and the bride liked one of them more than the others. Irina took her time to answer and asked the prince which dress he liked best. His Highness did not choose one of the 3, but bought all 3 dresses and had them packed and sent to the Blaze family's estate. The dresses were finished, and the sisters were about to head home. Before doing so, Irina thanked the prince for keeping her company. Mirabelle was concerned about the fact that since they had 3 wedding dresses, each of them should be accompanied by jewelry. For this, she was going to consult with the owner of the store. She took all the responsibility for this. Carmel told the girl that she could come to him for help at any time. This accommodating attitude pleased the girl, as she had to start choosing a tailcoat for the young man soon, so she was going to write him a letter and make an appointment to do so. When the girl went home, Carmel took Irina by the hand and decided to take her to one special place. They ended up in a boat in the middle of the lake because Carmel wanted to be alone with Irina. The young man admitted that he would like to live in a place like this. Strangely enough, it seemed to Irina that the prince wanted to lock her up like a caged bird in a place like this. This was not quite true, though not far from the truth, as His Highness was by nature a rather greedy man and wanted to possess many things. But he was not going to voice them so that the girl would not run away from him. Irina even got excited and decided to guess what her fiancé wanted so much. But nothing came to her mind, no matter how hard she tried to think of the right option. Meanwhile, a messenger from the second prince came to the Blaze family's estate and handed over a mask for Irina and said that they were expecting her at the reception and hoped she wouldn't refuse the invitation this time.
But Leonarda says she knows that her father promised Balin something in return for marrying her. Though he'll probably... Leonarda replies that this is ridiculous. He will never fit into secular society until he gets rid of his nasty habits.
She was afraid he would make a fuss. So this time, she decided to accept the man's invitation. The butler was worried about his mistress, because something was wrong here. Irina realized it herself. That's why she wanted to know what kind of person the second prince was.
Turning her back to him, she orders him to get out if he gets it. And don't forget to tell your mommy what happened here.
To her. The guy noticed that the girl had perfect hearing since she was so quick to detect his arrival. The protagonist informed him that the second prince had sent her an invitation and she had decided to go to the masquerade ball. Kasha-kun remarked that it all looked very suspicious.
Balin raises his fist for another blow, and Leonardo covers his head with his hand in preparation. But suddenly his fist is stopped. Lucas calmly says that he came here looking for his lady, but found some garbage. Leonardo tries in amazement to ask how he ended up here, since he wasn't going to come today. Balin yells for Lucas to take his hands off, lashes out and tries to pounce on the prince. He is stopped by a sword blade pressed against his throat. It is Cyrus, and he says that whoever willfully harms a member of the imperial family is sentenced to death. Balin falls down. Alexandra is smitten with her brother, and Lucas laughingly stops him and says that they need to find out who is. Still with the same smile, Lucas replies that it matters to him. And Leonardo bashfully says that it's Edgar Balin. Lucas knows the surname. Leonardo explains that although he is from a noble family, the title has been inherited for 3 generations, and Edgar is the second son.
Redfield approached her. Irina admitted that she could not help but come here, as the second prince was too insistent in calling her to visit.
With a unique smile, Lucas approaches Balin, who is lying on the ground, and asks him to clarify. Matching Kira's words and that sword, Balin realizes that this guy is Prince Lucas. He hurriedly stands up and tries to come up with an excuse. Especially for Balin, Lucas affectionately draws Lennart to him, calling her his favorite, and sells his hand to Alexa. Balin immediately realizes what he has done and falls on his knees in front of Alexei. She looms over him and menacingly asks if he really thinks alcohol and a stupid mistake can serve as a good explanation for what he did.
Objects and the person opposite were like a fog.
Balin tries to say something, but Keir interrupts, warning him in advance that no excuses will help for threatening his. Leonardo asks how Keir and Lucas got here in the first place. Lucas answers with a smile that Keir wanted to come and get his sister, and that he had come along for the ride.
But if he has nothing more to say to her, she will go home.
He was too lazy to send an official letter to the Duke for permission to visit. He just decided to visit his beloved at the same time. It was good for him to come and see how dare anyone. Balin, still on his knees, tries to explain that Leonardo will soon be his wife. Entona had disrespected him, and he, as her fiancé, was just trying to reason with her.
Emperor, and she would need money to exist in the future.
Alexandra approaches him and asks him what kind of upbringing he thinks he subjected his fiancée to in her own home, recalling his threat. Shamefully looking away, Balin apologizes. He just mistook Lady Lamisha for a servant. Alexa freaks out. More calmly, she says, addressing Balin as gentleman, that she has been appointed by the Empress herself to educate Lady Camellia, and he has no right to bring her up himself, nor. He tries to say something about it being between a man and a woman, but she is unwilling to listen to his excuses. When he heard that the Imelda appears, and Balin throws herself on her chest with relief and tears, she shouts at Leonardo, trying to find out what is going on here.
Thought that she could not even move normally, not to kill him, so her threats sounded ridiculous.
Alexa quietly tells Leonardo that nothing will happen to her and asks her to forgive her in advance, but she will accuse her fiancé of attempted rape. Imelda and Balin are stunned by her words. Balin begins to roar that he wouldn't have done anything if he'd known it was Lady Lamisha. Keir snorts. Balin's drenched eyes wouldn't have been able to tell one from the other.
With the prince falling to the floor.
Alexa looks at Balin silently and with undisguised disdain. Imelda hesitantly asks him to leave him alone. She will deal with him herself. Even Lucas answers her, stepping forward to keep her quiet since she knows nothing. He says that for the sake of the Camellia family's even when it was hinted that she already had a fiancé, Lucas remained silent, swallowing his resentment. He asked Imelda if it was the Duke's honor to prefer a prince to a man who had tried to dishonor a noblewoman of the House of Lemetius. Lucas puts his hand on Leonardo's shoulder and asks why on earth she has to endure so-called parenting from someone like that.
And it even seemed to her that it would have to be amputated.
Imelda panics and says that there has been a misunderstanding, but Lucas does not listen to her and looks into Leonarda's eyes. He fervently asks her to tell her everything, because
However, then she did not lower her hands and began to move forward, because the desire for revenge was much stronger. In addition, she knew very well that after this, most likely, she would take her life.
she decides to play along and throws herself on his chest with crocodile tears. Imelda erupts and Alexa immediately steps forward and says that as Leonarda's mentor she tells Imelda that her role as mentor is clear. Leonarda is important because the prince himself has asked her to marry him. It doesn't matter that she is already betrothed to someone else.
After all, she had never been cold around him. But now she asked his permission to sleep for a while and fell asleep on his shoulder. She felt like a stone wall next to Carmel, so she slept the sweetest dream of her life. But she woke up in a strange place. The young man sat next to her and asked if she could get some more sleep. As she still looked tired, Irina was a little scared as she didn't realize where they were. It turned out that they were in the prince's room and she was lying in his bed. His Highness first poured her some ginger tea, as he thought she might have gotten frostbite yesterday. The girl realized that she had been out of sorts yesterday, so she began to tell the prince various things about her past life. Carmel, on the other hand, wanted to know the details of whether she'd really gotten frostbite once, but Irina said she didn't remember anything. The girl realized that she would have to say something, so she decided that the best option would be to say that she had retold him the plot of a book whose title she couldn't remember. His Highness was glad that the girl was all right, but he was interested in the details of what had happened to her at Redfield's ball. Irina informed her fiancé that there was a strange smell in his brother's castle, and all the people were breathing it. From her pocket, she took out the very powder that the second prince had used. She had purposely taken some to analyze, as she was sure there would be a lot of interesting details. Carmel was surprised, for this wasn't the first time he'd wanted to find out what Redfield was doing at his balls. But he'd failed, and his fiancée had gotten it right the first time. Another thing that seemed strange to the protagonist was that they were sitting in the same room, but she was the only one who got sick. Carmel assumed that her brother had an antidote, that they had figured out this detail about the second prince was good, but Carmel didn't like the fact that Irina was constantly getting involved in dangerous matters. As it was, the prince asked the protagonist to rest a little longer, and he himself was impressed by the story about frostbite, which was not true. After that, the prince met with Kasha-kun and gave him the powder to analyze, asking him not to tell Irina that a suspicious person had appeared in her estate. His Highness was afraid that the girl would once again become a major participant in dangerous games, but Kasha-kun didn't understand what they should do then. Carmel was personally going to take care of the problem. To do so, he needed to go to Blaze Manor, but first Kasha had to go undercover at the manor. But he was sure that was a bad idea since Mirabelle knows him. Carmel didn't understand why the guy was so stubborn and unwilling to do this task. But since he couldn't or wouldn't do it himself, he had to find someone to replace him. His Highness couldn't send just anyone to do the job, as the enemy had managed to get away even from Kashi-kun. Though the young man didn't want to do the task but agreed, Carmel reminded the young man that his main task was to put Irina's safety first. Kasha-kun didn't understand why, after so many years of working with Carmel, this was the first time he tried to refuse to do his bidding. Did he really want to protect Mirabelle? Meanwhile, Irina and Carmel were drinking tea. The girl thanked her fiancé for giving her a good rest, and suddenly the young man told her that he was not going to demand a dowry from her family, though it was part of the traditions of their empire. The emperor had agreed to this as well, and for the people they would say that his love was so great that he refused to accept her dowry. It was not meant to affect the Blaze family in any way. But here Irina did not understand the benefit to herself of such a broad gesture. The prince smiled and said that she was now indebted to him and would repay him when the time came. Mirabelle decided to meet him. As she realized that she would always be able to refuse, Miguel said that the guy was waiting for her in the living room on the first floor. The girl asked the butler to clean up the place and decided to be the first to go to the meeting and see the employee. Mirabelle recognized Kasha-kun at once, but could not understand how he was here, and most importantly for what purpose, whether it was because of her strange request that evening when she had saved his life. He came very close to the girl, and in one sharp movement closed the open door so that no one would interfere with them. The guy decided to lie to her, and told her that he came to her house because of a promise made that night when she saved his life. Kasha-kun said that his wounds were now healed, except that he could no longer move as he used to, and could no longer do the dangerous work that brought him decent money. He also told the girl that he had been told that there were wounds that could not be healed. Mirabelle was looking at him with all eyes and listening to the story about the guy wanting to live a normal life and get a normal job at her estate. When the butler came into the room, the girl informed him that they were hiring this young man for a job. Kasha-kun exhaled as he managed to accomplish the main task, which was to infiltrate the house. Meanwhile, Irina was walking by the garden and was thinking that she hadn't talked to her sister for a long time, so she wanted to have a tea party in the garden with her. At that moment, she saw Kasha-kun, who was talking to her sister about something. The girl also saw her sister and informed her that she had hired a new worker to their estate. Irina appreciated the spy's game, and then suggested her sister have tea in the garden, as she had some free time now. Mirabelle ran to ask Mary to make them tea. When Irina and Kasha-kun were left alone, the guy apologized for not being able to warn her about this assignment. It was an order from Carmel, who wanted the guy on the spot directly to ensure the safety of his bride. Although Irina thought that it was not necessary, nevertheless the prince had a different opinion, and Kasha could not disobey orders. The protagonist looked at the guy and asked him to protect her sister. Then she would allow him to work in the house. He gave her his word. At this moment, the girl appeared in the garden again, only already with Mary and a tray of various goodies. Mirabelle turned to Kasha-kun and said that first she would have tea with her sister and then show him his room. In the evening, the butler led the lad to his room, saying that as of late all the servants lived two to a room, so he would have a roommate to get along with. Kasha-kun just happened to be roommates with Bartney Coben, a spy of Powaluk's who played up the friendliness. In the morning, Kasha-kun asked one of his men to tell the prince that he had successfully infiltrated the house and was actively monitoring everyone in the house. The young man thought that the introduction of various vetted people in the manor would be enough to protect the Blaze family members. But he was wrong, and now he had to personally take care of the case himself. At this moment, he was approached by Mirabelle, who wanted to call him to dinner and spend this time together. Kasha-kun allowed her to call herself simply Khan then, and the girl wanted him to call her by her first name in private. Though the boy refused, his wish didn't matter, for the girl herself allowed him to drop the formalities and then tugged his hand for lunch. Mirabelle had prepared a dish especially for him, so she wanted to give it to him. But Kun thought that as a servant, he was not supposed to eat with her at the same table. But in this house, she decided what could and could not be eaten. The girl confessed that because she was often sick, she could only eat healthy food, and this dish she liked the most. Kasha-kun tried the dish. He liked it. As he was generally unpretentious in food, Mirabelle was happy to hear this, and the boy could not understand why she treated him so well. But such beautiful days were too few in his life, for soon he would have to do what he had always done. The young man continued to work on the estate, and could not understand why it was always Mirabelle who ran to him when she saw him. He tried to run away from her, but the girl fell down trying to catch up with him. Kasha-kun went to her and helped her stand up, after which he asked her why she was always following him. Mirabelle admitted that she wanted to talk to the guy very badly, but he asked her not to do so because someone could understand her intentions wrongly. The girl did not care about the opinion of others, and Kasha-kun realized that he had to find the spy and leave the mansion as soon as possible. Irina looked out the window and was nervous. Because tomorrow she was marrying a prince, she had prepared everything for this event, and everything should go off without a hitch. A couple minutes later, she went down to the dining room where Derek was already waiting for her. Her brother was quite worried about his sister, as he had heard that girls were very nervous before a wedding. But Irina was fine. Mary gave Irina porridge for breakfast, which Derek asked her to cook for her sister. The girl smiled and thanked him for his care. The main character was glad that she was able to get closer to her brother during this time, because in the past life, their relationship was not so warm. Mirabelle, on the other hand, did not come down for breakfast, so her sister was worried about the little girl and brought her some food to her room. But the food didn't bother the girl as she finished her wedding dress and asked her sister to look at it. Irina was absolutely thrilled with what she saw in front of her. The wedding day came. Mirabelle helped her sister put on her wedding outfit, in which she looked fantastic. Lady Lawrence looked at Irina and could not look away, for she was very beautiful. The protagonist did not forget to thank her sister once again, but the girl was sure that all the cases in her model, so the dress sat on her perfectly. At that moment, her father came into the bride's room. Irina told him that everything was ready and he need not worry. There was one thing he wanted to give to his daughter before the wedding. The man had kept the item for a long time, which the girl was bequeathed to her by her mom before she died. Before leaving, the Earl asked his daughter to remember the title she had been given and to act wisely in every situation in life. When Irina opened the box, she saw a pair of beautiful earrings that used to belong to her mom. She wondered what her mom would advise her now, and remembered that her mom always told her to do what her heart told her to do. So now the protagonist realized that she would do what she thought was right, and no one would be able to stop her. The main character has long worked on the preparation of the wedding, and now the moment has come when she will walk down this path to the wedding, holding in her hands a bouquet of lavender. To the altar she was led by her father, and the girl realized that she made the right choice, offering the prince to marry her. Carmel was waiting for her at the end of the path. He was smiling gently at her, so the girl wondered what he was thinking right now. The priest began his speech, and when asked, Carmel confidently vowed to love and care for his wife forever. Irina, too, vowed to love, respect, and cherish her husband to the end of her days, to share her sorrow and joy with him, whereupon the priest pronounced them husband and wife and wished that God would protect their marriage. Now the groom was to kiss the bride as a token of his eternal love. It was a beautiful, tender kiss between the prince and the count's daughter. It was definitely over now. They stood side by side in front of their guests and smiled at them. Irina wondered what Carmel was thinking at this moment. The answer was simple. The young man with all his heart wanted to kiss the girl one more time. Besides, today the stars aligned. They, guy and girl, were very happy that they found each other. The grandson and grandfather of the Kraus family watched the wedding from the sidelines. The boy wondered what his grandfather thought about it. The latter thought it was none of their business. Globally speaking, in the realm of politics, the old man believed that nothing would change never Redfield or when Carmel became emperor. After the ceremony with the priest, the couple returned to the palace, changed outfits, and the prince realized that the dress on his wife was very different from what he had imagined, for he had not expected his wife to choose something of similar design, for here the back was too open. He asked the girl to throw a shawl over her shoulders, as he did not want anyone but him to see such beauty. Irina laughed as she thought her husband was joking. He couldn't have turned into a tyrant in the early hours of their marriage, controlling what she wore. Carmel admitted that everything suited his wife, but here he wanted her to wear revealing outfits only around him, because otherwise he would go crazy with jealousy. Emperor Sullivan and Empress Ophelia were already waiting for them in the hall. The emperor was well aware that the pair were most likely very tired from the day, so he asked them to sit next to each other and enjoy the event. As soon as the crown prince and princess took their seats, the ceremony of congratulating the newlyweds and presenting them with gifts began. The first to arrive were the ambassador and his entourage from Frigren. As a gift to the emperor, they brought very valuable fabrics that could only be found in their empire. Sullivan thanked her for the gift, but said that the cloths would be more to his wife's liking and she would appreciate them. Ophelia said she could not accept them yet, for they were a gift to her beloved husband. But if he chose to give them to her in the future, she would accept them. The delegation had prepared fabrics as a gift for Irina as well, and she thought Mirabelle would be delighted with them. Irina was already tired, and the people were not getting smaller. There were so many representatives from different kingdoms, and they brought too many gifts. It was obvious that this was how each of them wanted to butter up the emperor and heir. After all, in the past it was the Rupord Empire that had started many wars. For too many centuries in a row, the emperors of the Rupord Empire had been obsessed with wars. Now was the calmest time in history for Sullivan's reign. But Carmel's past was exactly the same as his ancestors, so everyone was afraid that he wouldn't start another war and spill rivers of blood. Suddenly, the guy caught her gaze, not understanding why she was looking at him like that, while the protagonist wanted to make every effort to prevent her husband from unleashing military conflicts. Irina was embarrassed and decided to change the topic of conversation, noticing that the ambassadors were slow to approach them, which delayed the timing of the gift-giving ceremony. The young man thought it was because of the rumors that were being spread about him, this despite the fact that he thought he had a very humane policy. So he asked her to let him know if she knew who was telling these tales about him. He was going to talk to these people and get his thoughts across to them. So why kill? It's inhumane after all. And his policies are the most humane in the world. The communication between the crown prince and the princess was watched closely by Ophelia. She realized that the two were communicating much better than she thought, which meant it could be used to their advantage. At this point, Sullivan became very ill and decided that it was time for him to rest, and further banquet will be held without him. Carmail offered to see his father off, but he refused, for this evening belonged entirely to the young man and his wife. But he ordered the Empress to leave the party with him. Since he was not feeling well, she should leave with him. Ophelia was not happy with her husband's decision but obeyed his orders. Irina asked the Emperor to rest, and he wished the young ones to have fun that evening. When the Emperor and Empress had gone, Irina told her husband that she wished to go and greet the other guests, after which she would return to him again. The first thing the girl did was to approach the Marquis of Holland, who had come such a long way to attend her wedding. The protagonist realized that she needed to befriend and enlist the support of this lady, as she controlled the social life of the South, while the Marquise said she was enchanted by the beauty of her wedding dress. Irina confessed that they bought the dress in a store in the capital, but all the jewelry to it was invented by her sister. Lady Holland did not expect that Mirabelle is such a talented girl. Besides, His Highness provided a lot of precious stones to create the decoration of the dress. Irina thought it was a great opportunity to show off and earn the prestige of the noble ladies. Her plan worked perfectly. The Marquis Holland admitted that she envied the crown princess, because this union was clearly created in heaven. The main character, remembering how many times Marquise Holland helped her, decided to send rare fabrics from the Free Grand Empire as a token of gratitude. Irina hoped that the woman will sew herself a beautiful dress from these fabrics. In addition, she invited the Marquise to pay her a visit in the Imperial Palace. With this, the protagonist sorted out, as suddenly saw Lady Shelby, and decided to approach her. Irina greeted the girl, and as if casually asked her about whether she is now working as a maid in the Imperial Palace. The answer was affirmative. The girl then came quite close to Elena, and said that she was warning her for the last time to behave quietly and honorably, and to hold tightly to the skirt of her savior. She further advised Lady Sarah to think hard and decide whose side she would support in the future. Lily Shelby was severely humiliated, so she wasn't going to leave it at that and was going to show Irina who ruled the ball here next time. The protagonist, meanwhile, had met with a huge number of people, so now her mind was all mixed up. So she talked to Lady Vivian while the woman was supporting the army, but overall the meeting was quite strange. At that moment, Mirabelle ran up to her. The girl said that she had been talking to Lady Glen all this time, who immediately bowed to the crown princess, and said that although she lived far away from the capital, but she couldn't help but come to her wedding. The girl did not think that she did something special, since at one time it was Irina who sent her a hairdresser who created the perfect hairstyle for her wedding, the protagonist. Then it was not difficult to do it, and she was happy that Glen's wedding day was unforgettable and happy. At that moment, Derek approached Carmail, who was standing off to the side, and decided to keep the man company while he waited for his sister. In addition, after receiving permission, Derek made a request to the crown prince. It was important to him that the young man put in the effort to make his sister happy. If His Highness does that, he and the entire Blaze family will be loyal to him for the rest of their lives. Carmel had no desire to repeat the same thing twice, so he asked Derek to remember that he would make Irina happy at any cost, no matter who got in his way. To tell the truth, then Earl Blaze's son didn't expect to hear such words from His Highness. It was respectful, so the young man bowed to the crown prince and said that he would serve him faithfully for the rest of his life. Derek left, and Irina came into the room where the prince was hiding from his guests, the young man reproaching her for leaving him alone for so long. Then he added that he had closed himself in here, not because he didn't want to socialize with people, but because he wanted to be alone with her. Irina reminded her husband that he wanted to introduce someone to her before the banquet was over. They came to the room where the grandfather and grandson of the Kraus family were waiting for them. This was quite a surprise to the girl. The performances ended, and Gary, the grandson of the head of the Kraus family, said that the love story of the crown prince and the princess had been on everyone's lips lately. Irina was surprised, as she didn't expect their love story to be legendary. It turned out that many girls began to compare their grooms to the romantic crown prince who gave her hundreds of jewels for her wedding dress, and yet did not charge her a dowry. The boy believed that this was true love. The main character took the prince under her arm, recognizing that the young man helps her in many ways and asks nothing in return, and then remembered that Evan Kraus was a one lover and devoted his entire life to only one woman, and he had to be lured to their side by any means necessary. At this point, Henry brightened up and asked how His Highness had proposed marriage to Irina. His grandfather did not appreciate his grandson's impulse and admonished him, asking him to behave himself and not to ask strange questions of other people. The main character did not consider it a problem as they did not make this event a secret. She said that one day the prince called her to the garden as he had prepared a surprise for her. There was a lake and overall a very beautiful place. It was there that Carmel said that he loved only her and offered to become his wife. Evans Kraus didn't expect that the crown prince who spent most of his life fighting could be so romantic. Carmel kept his eyes on his wife, saying that he was just a normal person, and people when they fall in love all become a bit romantic. Henry thanked Irina for answering his question, and the girl had already invited the boy to visit them at the Imperial Palace. The boy happily jumped at the offer, and the protagonist said that they would make lots of goodies especially for him. When the grandfather and grandson were left alone, the boy said that he asked his question for a reason. He was wondering if the prince and princess had a fictitious marriage or not. Evans was not interested in the topic, but Henry listened carefully to what Irina was saying and watched her. The old man did not want his grandson to get close to the princess, but the boy said there was nothing to fear, as he had everything under control. Evans Kraus had no idea what was going on in this kid's head, but the only thing he was asking him to do was not to harm their trade alliance. Redfield had been drinking. His assistant didn't understand why the young man was acting like this. After all, the crown princess had been to his party and knows about the zest of these evenings. Redfield was of a different opinion. He thought the girl knew nothing, and even if she did, she couldn't do anything to him. The aide began to anger the second prince, because he did not realize that he was protected by the Empress and the family Anita, and therefore no one would dare to touch him. The young man was drunk. Nevertheless, he had an obsession that Irina should be his. The banquet ended. Carmel and Irina were on their way to their shared bedroom, as they must live together from now on. When they entered the room, the girl noted that the young man had prepared everything well. He did not think that she would stand at the entrance. The situation was awkward, but the girl entered the room and even sat down next to her husband. But here, from a glass of wine, politely refused. It was funny. But Carmel warned the girl that if she continued to show weakness, he would want to take advantage of it. Irina was afraid that the young man wanted to break their contract, but that wasn't the case. He just didn't want to complicate an already long and difficult day. In addition, he had never broken their agreement until this day, and had no intention of doing so. But he had asked her to abide by all the terms of the deal as well. Of the 4 points, the third was the one she was most concerned about now, because she knew very well that after Carmel became the emperor and she became the empress, they would fulfill their conjugal duty. Since that was the case, it was time for the young man to fulfill his promise. He bared his blade and in one motion slashed his palm, his blood spilling onto the sheets of their marital bed. Irina knew that there was a belief in the Rupord family that if the bloody sheets were burned after the first wedding night, the young family would have healthy children. Irina hadn't thought about this moment before, but after all, the fact there should have been traces left on the sheet after this night. But looking at her husband, she was worried that he would be all right. At this moment, the girl realized that she had increased her debts to the prince this night. Carmel was not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, but was pursuing his motives, as the more Irenaeus owed to him, the longer she would be around. Feeling her care, the prince wanted his wife to show more attention to him. She didn't understand what was wrong. After all, she had become his wife and loyal knight, thus fulfilling the terms of the contract. This was not the answer Carmel wanted to hear, so to realize he'd rather not bring it up. So His Highness gloomed and said, "Bedtime," taking a seat on the couch, as he thought his wife should sleep in the bed. Irina went to the bathroom, and Carmel realized that he needed to become emperor quickly, as he wouldn't last long at this rate. When the protagonist woke up in the morning, her husband was no longer in the room, but the mountain of gifts from him was, and in each box were jewelry. Not to say that this gesture Carmela pleased her, so the girl got dressed and went to look for him on the training ground. The protagonist suddenly noticed that the young man looked tired, so she concluded that the one was uncomfortable last night. But it was not, and the guy said that he just did not sleep. But she wanted to talk about the gifts he had sent her, for they were too expensive and she could not accept them. So the situation came out burdensome. Carmel realized that he was in a stalemate situation, as there was no way he could charm his wife with gifts and luxury, as she had no need for dresses and jewels. Plus, he didn't want to fight on their first day together. So he asked her to consider all the gifts as a way to strengthen her position in society. The girl had to back off a bit. Plus, she asked her husband not to refuse her gifts to him anymore. She was going to get into investing soon, and knowing who was what from her past life, she made the decision to only work with proven people. Besides, Irina wanted to ask Carmel to give her permission to train here. After all, this was his personal training ground. In fact, the young man wasn't against it. But there was a training ground for his men nearby, and they often came in here. Of course, he could issue an edict and forbid them from doing so. And men would not come here. Yet others might notice the fact that she spends too much time in this place, and strange rumors about her would creep in. But there was another way that would work for everyone 100%. This interested the girl, and she allowed her husband to act. After getting carte blanche, Carmel kissed his wife. At that moment, one of His Highness's men entered the set. After seeing the crown prince and princess merge in a kiss, he left the training ground, ordering the others not to enter there again. Irina didn't understand why her husband did it. He explained that if they let the rumors spread that they were not only training here, but doing more interesting things, then no one would dare to come here even. Meanwhile, a gray-haired woman approached the imperial palace. She said that she urgently needed to see Irina. The girl was immediately informed that she had a visitor who introduced herself to the guard as the crown princess's nanny. The protagonist went straight to meet the woman. Although she had sent a letter to her before her wedding, she didn't think that the nanny would arrive so quickly. The problem was that Irene had promised to dine with Carmel, so she had asked the maid to tell the prince that she had an important guest arriving and would not be able to keep him company at the meal today. Although the protagonist was happy to see the woman, but she was worried about her health, as she could not come to her wedding because of illness. It upset the nanny. Nevertheless, she came as quickly as she could. In addition, she remembered the girl as a baby. The woman was sure that if the protagonist's mother could see her, she would be very proud of her daughter. At that moment, one of the maids came into Irina's room and informed her that the Empress had prepared a present for her. The protagonist was curious to see the gift. It was a pink flower, which was quite rare and grew only in the neighboring empire, which helped girls to get pregnant. Irina appreciated the appearance and pleasant aroma of the plant and asked to put it in her bedroom. The girl's nanny didn't understand why such a beautiful flower should be taken away and suggested leaving it here to enjoy its fragrance. The protagonist agreed to this proposal, but when the maids left, her nanny approached the plant, and the expression on her face was extremely tense, after which the woman opened the window, saying that if you inhale the fragrance of the flower for a long time, it will have a bad effect on the girl's health. Nanny heard that the Saiban Empire grows many toxic plants that negatively affect women's health, and many girls are unable to give birth to a child after coming into contact with them. Irina gloomed, for she had never thought about children before. For she and Carmel had a fake relationship. The protagonist realized that she had been too naive and underestimated some personalities in the palace who could use rather ordinary things as weapons. Irina thanked the nanny for her help, but the latter said that this was only the beginning, because women in this place have an unspoken struggle, which is connected with who was able to give birth to a child, who could not, and who had more children. The protagonist never thought about this side of the relationship with the prince, but realized that in time he will probably have a second wife. So Irina did not want to think about it and offered the nanny to become her chief maid, because in the palace it would be easier to monitor her health, strange as it may seem, but the woman immediately agreed. The protagonist continued to worry about her nanny's state of health, so she asked her to inform her at once if she became unwell and found it difficult to work. Now Irina had to think what her response to the plant would be, for she was to have a meeting with the Empress in the afternoon. Besides, the maid who brought the flower was behaving strangely, so Irina decided to ask Gennard about the staff. Gennard came at once. He was extremely polite to her, as he thought that he should be the first to set an example of respectful attitude to her. The girl noticed that the man was a bit like Kasha-kun, but at the same time, the spy always cared deeply about the opinion of others, unlike the manager. And then Irina asked the man if she could find out more information about the people who worked in the Crown Prince's castle today. In addition, the girl wanted to introduce everyone to the new main maid. The woman admitted that she used to take care of the main character for many years, as she was her nanny. Since Irene wanted to meet with the workers before going to meet the Empress, Gennard said he would gather everyone he could. Also, the girl thought that this man could be assigned to investigate about this flower. As soon as the man found out that the plant had been sent by the Empress, he wanted to send it for analysis at once, but Irina prevented him from doing so, as she thought it was necessary to put it in a prominent place. The protagonist was going to find the Empress's spy among her servants first, and then play a beautiful performance. The man appreciated the Crown Princess's plan at face value and went to summon the servants for her. Gennard also informed Irina that he had ordered the staff to stay away from the prince's training ground. The girl had already forgotten about the kiss with her husband, but the others remembered. The nanny wondered what could have happened there, but the manager decided to leave to avoid answering. Irina, however, was redder than red, but she told her nanny that nothing had happened on the training ground. Meanwhile, Gennard had completed her errand, and the girl could examine all the servants he had managed to gather, since from this day forward she would be managing all affairs at the Crown Prince's castle. Irina asked for her full assistance and introduced her nanny as the head maid. She then looked for a maid named Asabi and appointed her as her personal maid. The protagonist realized long ago that enemies should be kept closer to her than friends, so if this girl works for the Empress, it will be possible to pass false information through her. Meanwhile, Ophelia reported that the flower was already in place. The maid thought that her opponents had understood nothing and were therefore far inferior in ability to the Empress. It was not so important, because the main thing was to make sure that Irina did not get pregnant before Sullivan died. The woman wondered how the girl would react to the truth about the flower, and besides, the newlyweds were to arrive soon, and she would be able to appreciate her daughter-in-law at face value. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince and Princess were going to the man's parents. He handed his wife a tie and asked her to tie it. Irina didn't understand why it was so complicated, but Carmel said he had heard from his co-workers that it was usually their wives who did such things. The protagonist admitted that she hadn't done anything like this before, so she didn't really want to start. Besides, her husband was looking at her with joyful anticipation, but His Highness didn't care even if he looked unkempt. The main thing was that she did it for him, so Irina reluctantly snatched the tie from his hands. The main character started to tie her tie, but she wasn't sure she was doing it right as well as the end result. As embarrassing as it was for her, she did very well for her first time. After that, she came to the throne room where Emperor Sullivan and Empress Ophelia were already waiting for them. The first thing that caught her eye was that the emperor was not feeling well even though he claimed to be fine. The man already knew that his son had given his wife a return gift, and everyone in the palace was talking about it. But the Empress believed that the Crown Prince and his wife had a good relationship rather than money. At this point, the protagonist turned to Ophelia and told her that she had received her gift today. Irina, with sweet speeches and perfect manners, wanted to try to put the cruel Empress's vigilance to sleep. Except that the Empress was an actress. The mosquito will not undercut the nose. Even proposed to plant a whole bed of these flowers at the castle of the prince. Irina politely declined the idea, as she thought that if this plant was everywhere, it would lose its uniqueness, and so she should just keep the Empress's gift carefully. At this point, Carmel already tensed up, as it was the first time he had heard about Ophelia making a gift to his wife. Irina realized her oversight, so she turned to her husband and said that she had so many different things to do that she had simply forgotten to tell him about the gift. His Highness was not angry, but asked the protagonist to henceforth inform him first about such important events. After that, he looked at his stepmother and said that he would also be very grateful if the Empress would even communicate even insignificant things to his wife through him. At that moment, the Emperor coughed. It was obvious that he was feeling worse. So Sullivan said that the newlyweds had had a busy first day at the castle, and they, as well as he, should rest. Carmel and Irina didn't need to take the hint twice. They bid the Emperor farewell and wished him a speedy recovery. But before leaving the throne room, Irina reminded Sullivan that he had made her a promise that when she became crown princess, they would dine together. The emperor remembered his promise perfectly and said that as soon as he was better, they would be sure to dine together. When Sullivan had another coughing fit, Ophelia asked him to go to his chambers and lie down for a while, but he interrupted her and told her that he would decide what to do and when to do it, and she should respect his decisions. The woman despised him, but at the same time she was afraid that he would make Carmail the emperor. Nevertheless, she said aloud that she did not understand what she had done, as she wished only good to her husband. The man felt guilty, because he realized that he would soon leave this world, so he became too sensitive. Ophelia herself knew that her husband did not have long to live in this world, and it pleased her immensely. Irina and Carmail were walking through the garden. The young man demanded that his wife throw away the Empress's gift, but she was not going to do it yet, for such a decision could cause rumors, and she had a good plan. The girl, as usual, didn't understand his feelings and excitement, this despite the fact that he never doubted her abilities. After all, his belief in her and his concern for her were different things. He was well aware that Ophelia was too cunning and cruel a woman, so he was worried about his wife. Irina, however, spoke again about the need to act, not sit idly by if they wanted Carmail to become emperor. The young man, however, did not understand her obsession with his ascension to the throne. The main character was well aware that her real reasons were similar to delusions, so it was clear that she could not tell her husband about them. Carmail had at first assumed that Irina herself wanted to become empress, but now he saw that she was not interested in power or money. So now, the young man was now increasingly wondering why a man who was indifferent to all such things wanted him to become the next emperor so badly. The protagonist did not understand what to answer, because her true reasons were unrealistic, and her husband would simply not believe them. Irene remembered again her past life. Back then, she had no one to rely on, so she went through all the hardships alone. Things were very different now, and the girl hoped that when Carmail became emperor, she would be able to tell him the whole truth. It sounded quite intriguing, and Irina asked her husband to remember that no matter what the circumstances were, she sincerely wanted him to become emperor. The young man understood all this perfectly well, but it did not cancel the fact that he would not stop worrying about her, because if something happened to her, he would lose the meaning of life. Meanwhile, at the Blaze family's estate, Mary and a few other servants were getting ready to move to the imperial palace. The butler looked out the window and saw Kasha-kun. The man understood that when Mirabelle found out that her favorite employee had petitioned for a transfer to the imperial palace, she would be very worried. When Mary was alone, she decided to read a letter from Tilda, who, like Sophie, had betrayed Lady Irina and defected to Lady Elena's side and now worked in her house. It was unclear then why the maid was writing her letters. The girl sincerely did not understand what the traitor could have written to her. Nevertheless, she opened the envelope and began to read the letter. Meanwhile, in one of the corridors of the house, Mirabelle caught Kashu-kun. She asked him if he was really going to transfer to the imperial palace. He nodded affirmatively. The young mistress could not understand why the man did not want to work in her house. After all, they had good conditions and she treated him with care. Before answering, Kasha-kun led the girl into an open room so no one would see them, though the girl didn't understand why they had to hide. The young man knew very well how the world worked, and that if the young mistress was in close contact with a servant, people would misunderstand and spread bad rumors about the girl. Therefore, Kasha-kun asked Mirabelle to be more restrained and careful, as he was going to go to the imperial palace and he didn't need any scandals. Mirabelle hadn't expected her special treatment of the young man to cause him any resentment, so she was a little upset, and she didn't think they were paying him enough money to make him want to change jobs. Even with all this, the girl was not going to let him go, as they had a contract for a year, and she was going to raise his salary and become better, so that he would be comfortable around her. So the girl asked him not to leave her. At this point, Kasha-kun realized that the situation was out of control, and there was nothing he could do. The young man went into his room and noticed that Bartony was packing his suitcase, putting his belongings away neatly. Bartony informed Kasha-kun that he was being transferred to the imperial palace and was packing his things. Of course, it was a bit sad to leave this place as he was used to it. But what can you do? Kasha-kun realized that he was the one who had been replaced by this man, and he pretended not to understand what it was all about, for he had simply been informed that there was a vacancy and offered the position, and he did not refuse. The young man didn't really listen to his neighbor and thought that maybe he should have asked His Highness to think of something and get him out of here. He lay down on the bed and covered his face with his hand, for he didn't understand why exactly now he had become so soft-hearted. Meanwhile, Irina and Carmel were eating a meal together, the girl pleased that her affairs at the Imperial Palace were going well and according to plan. The protagonist was pleased that her nanny was doing an excellent job as head maid. Things were going well with the flowers so far, too. On top of everything else, they had hired a man to keep an eye on Asabi's maid. Everything was going well so far, but there was still too much to do to strengthen the protagonist's position in the Imperial Palace. However, Irina had a new problem. When she looked at her fake husband, her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. Meanwhile, Carmel looked at the girl and said that although he was all hers, and they could see each other any time, he wanted them to continue to have lunch and dinner together. After dinner, the girl sat in her room, looked in the mirror and realized that she was missing, as last time at dinner, and this time her heart was beating fast at the sight of her husband. On one hand, everything was the same as it had been for many days before, but something had definitely changed. But what it was, she didn't understand yet. Irina was dizzy with worry, because if she really fell in love with the Crown Prince, then all her plans could collapse in an instant. At that moment, she felt that someone was in the room, and when she turned around, she saw Carmel, who had come in to check if she was all right, as she did not react to him calling her. The young man understood perfectly well that the girl had gone so much into her thoughts that she had not heard him, so he now wondered what was occupying her thoughts. Irina denied it vigorously, after which they both changed clothes and were about to go to bed, Carmel saying he would blow out the candles. But since the girl was closer, she decided to blow out the candles herself, and she wanted to do it quickly, as it was hardest for her to be near her husband at that time of day. And so she blew out the candles, only it didn't get any better, because in the darkness the girl felt her husband's presence even more clearly. Irina was in such a hurry to get to bed that she didn't notice the box under her feet and tripped over it, hitting herself quite painfully. She remembered well that in her previous life, she had had to sleep in barracks crowded with men. As strange as it may sound, she didn't feel embarrassment then. She was so devastated by the feeling of loss that she felt nothing else. Her heart had turned into a huge black hole. She now shared a bedroom with a single man, but she couldn't regain control of her feelings. Carmel was scared for her, but the girl said she was fine, for she thought love was too great a luxury for her. The Crown Prince didn't believe she was okay, so he walked over to her and lifted her in his arms to carry her to bed. The young man decided to carry his wife to the bed. Besides, he insisted that if she was in pain, he should call a doctor, but she turned from this idea, saying that her leg did not hurt. Irina was too embarrassed at this point and said that if her leg didn't stop hurting in the morning, then she would call a doctor. Carmel hoped his wife wouldn't cheat him, and now he agreed that it was late and time for bed. The worst part was that she had been thinking about her husband all night, which meant that all those unwanted feelings and emotions could negatively affect her plans since she had no control over them. Nevertheless, the girl reminded herself that she had to get revenge on Paveluk, for she had no other choice if she wanted to protect her family. At that moment, Carmel came up to her and asked her to tell him honestly whether her leg was hurting or not. The girl was in no hurry to answer him, so the Crown Prince decided to take charge of the situation and lifted the blanket to look at her leg. The young man admitted that he had been greatly concerned about her condition all night and had been waiting for the moment when she would wake up. Now he saw that he was not mistaken, for her leg was badly swollen and reddened at the sight of the contusion. The Crown Prince didn't like the fact that his wife had lied to him, claiming her leg didn't hurt and believing it would go away on its own. Carmel realized that now he could not believe the girl if she said she had no pain, whereupon he ordered the maid to get the doctor here immediately. In her past life, Irina had had to take care of her injuries herself, so now it was suddenly disconcerting to her that someone else was showing concern for her. The doctor came immediately, examined the girl's leg and said that nothing serious had happened to it, and if the pain was not severe, he suggested that the bandage should not be adjusted. Carmel was surprised by this decision of the doctor, as he could clearly see that his wife's leg was badly swollen, so he demanded that the doctor apply a bandage. Irina again justified the Crown Prince's actions with their fake story, thinking that in terms of their mad contract love, he had reacted correctly. So she decided to play along and thanked him, saying that she was very pleased that he had taken care of her in this situation. Carmel didn't understand how he could do otherwise as she was hurt, so he asked her not to be sick anymore, as he felt badly for her. No one had ever treated her so warmly and gently in this life or in the past, so now her husband's light touch on her cheek made her feel so good. Later, Irina was sitting at the window looking out over the garden when Nanny came into the room and said that Gennard had come to see the girl. The man gathered all the information necessary to familiarize the protagonist with the flower given to her by the Empress. After reading the document, the girl learned that there are practically 2 identical flowers in the world, one called Manera and the other called Panera. Irina understood that most likely Ophelia was well aware that Manera was detrimental to a woman's health, while Panera on the contrary helped. But here was the question of which one the girl received as a gift. Gennard not only gathered and structured information for Irina, but he also found a scientist who knew about these plants and who gave his verdict on her flower. The answer was obvious. Irina had received the Manera. She realized it herself. But what was to be done now? Because most likely the Empress would say that she had mixed up the flowers when the truth came out. The protagonist had another question for Gennard, whether he had told her husband all this information and what her Carmel replied to all this. The young man realized that the Crown Princess was a smart girl and had guessed everything. So he calmly said that the Crown Prince had said that she could do whatever she wanted, and he, Gennard, should help her. At this moment, the girl's heart was overflowing with happiness as her husband gave her free rein, which meant that he trusted her. So it was time for a return move. The girl knew that ambassadors from different countries, including Sabania, had come to her wedding. She wanted to organize a Thanksgiving reception for all of them, including inviting the Empress to it. In the middle of the reception, Irina was going to put the flower of the Marina on display to watch the Empress's reaction. While everything was going fairly smoothly, suddenly a maid came into Irina's room and informed her that Mirabelle and several servants from her parents' house had come to visit the girl. The protagonist decided to personally go out and meet the new palace staff. Mary immediately noticed her leg, but Irina assured the maid that she was fine. Mary was sure that Mistress would really be okay now that she had arrived and would take very good care of her. Irina noticed that her sister was not among the crowd, but then changed the subject and said that a man would be here in a couple of minutes to explain to the workers their duties and show them where they would be staying. After that, she asked Asabi to tell the head maid that more maids had arrived and she should take care of them personally. Mary had carefully observed the manners of the maid from the imperial palace and concluded that the latter was a level above herself. Just as Mary was about to tell Irene about the letters she had received, Mirabelle ran up to her sister and hugged her tightly because she missed her so much. The sisters' reunion was closely watched by Bartney, who stood beside the carriage unloading the things they had brought from the Blaze family's estate. Irina and Mirabelle were sitting in the living room drinking tea. Suddenly, the girl gave her sister the list of servants and said that she had replaced one person because she was very attached to him. The protagonist saw that it was about Kasha-kun. She didn't expect her sister to care so much for the young man. Irina figured it wouldn't be so bad if Kasha-kun stayed at her parents' house and looked after her sister. After all, he was someone she could trust.